Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of those rabbit holes you didn't even know you needed. Strange old British jobs that sound completely made up, but somehow weren't. And let's be honest, most of these sound like someone lost a bet. Or maybe a very bored king just pointed at someone and said, "Yes, you, from now on, you're in charge of licking my spoons." We're starting with one of the weirdest of them all. It's called Groom of the Stool, and yes, you heard that right. This was an actual title. Emphasis on actual, because otherwise you'd think it was the name of a Monty Python character. The Groom of the Stool was basically the most trusted servant of the English monarch, because his job, no joke, was to help the king go to the bathroom, and not just in the metaphorical sense. You were right there, in the action, in the splash zone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? I want to imagine your sleepy little corner of the world while I tell you about Tudor-era toilet politics. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the year 1530, wandering the lush, chilly corridors of Hampton Court Palace. You're surrounded by velvet drapes, oil lamps, and the musty breath of history. Everything smells like smoked meat, rosemary, and the lingering sweat of important people who don't believe in bathing. You're not a noble, you're not a knight, you're something much closer to the throne, literally. You're His Majesty's Groom of the Stool, and your daily routine is about to get personal. At sunrise you dress the king, you fluff his sleeves, you hand him his sword like it's a sacred relic. You also know what time he likes to relieve himself, and when that time comes, you don't leave the room. Oh no, you stay. You bring out a special piece of furniture called a close stool. Think a padded chair with a hidden chamber pot beneath the seat. It's not quite a toilet, not quite a throne, but absolutely a nightmare hybrid of both. Now here's the twist. This job was actually a massive honour, because access to the king in such unguarded moments meant you could whisper in his ear, shape court decisions, and pull serious political strings. The Groom of the Stool was often a high-born nobleman, someone from a prestigious family. You might even be promoted from this unique role to major offices of state. Yes, wiping royal behinds could lead directly to managing the treasury, which, when you think about it, feels metaphorically appropriate. Historical fact for you. Under King Henry VIII, the bloated, gouty monarch with a love for food and chopping off wives, the Groom of the Stool was a guy named Sir William Compton, and Sir William was no lowly servant. He gained massive influence simply by being the guy who was always there, during the king's most vulnerable moments. Talk about strategic positioning. Here's the quirky fringe fact. Henry VIII had multiple custom stools, and some were even travelled with. They were packed along with the royal baggage and brought to castles and battlefields. Imagine being the guy who has to carry the king's fancy toilet through a muddy forest while the rest of the army is bracing for war. Talk about morale. Now, scholars still debate whether the Groom of the Stool actually did the wiping or just supervised. There are records suggesting both. Some historians argue the role became increasingly ceremonial as time went on, more about keeping records of the king's digestion, and less about, well, actual clean-up. Others believe that in Henry's time, when the position was still relatively intimate, the groom might have absolutely gotten hands-on, or cloth on anyway. The evidence is squishy. Sorry, too far. You, in your linen sleeves and finely embroidered doublet, take this all very seriously. You have a ledger noting what His Majesty ate, how often he went, and what the results looked like. This wasn't just weird curiosity, it was proto-medicine. Royal doctors wanted to know the colour, smell and consistency of the king's humours, which were believed to affect everything from mood to military decisions. And to be fair, Henry had issues. Chronic constipation, gout, possibly type 2 diabetes centuries before anyone knew what that was. You, as his groom, became an early warning system. You might be the only one who knows the king is unwell before even his physicians do, which means no pressure, but your observations might just prevent a civil war. Despite the toilet talk, you're basically the royal bestie. You attend private dinners, you help the king dress for coronations, You're there when he whispers about his suspicions, his crushes, and which lord he's planning to quietly ruin next week. You, noble friend, are part valet, part confessor, part living bathroom diary. By the time you retire, maybe 20 years from now, you'll be loaded. Estates, titles, probably a few dark secrets and a couple of ulcers, but you'll never forget your first day, standing awkwardly beside a gold-fringed toilet listening to the world's most powerful man ask for more prunes. You close the chamber pot lid with a soft click, carry it off like it's the Ark of the Covenant, and fade into the shadows of Tudor politics. One royal flush at a time. All right, you're still here, which means either you're deeply committed to historical absurdity or just too comfy to move. Either way, good choice. Because tonight, we go from Tudor toilets to early morning windows where a whole different kind of professional is getting ready to do the rudest job in Britain. Picture it. Thick morning fog curling through the soot-streaked alleys of industrial Manchester. It's the 1840s, and the entire city smells faintly of coal smoke and wet wool. You, my friend, are not sipping tea or lounging in a nightgown waiting for the day to happen. Nope. You're out on the cobblestones at 4 a.m, gripping a long stick with a wire ball at the end, and peering up at windows like a particularly passive-aggressive stalker. You are a knocker-up, and your job, wake people up, one by one, by tapping on their bedroom windows, for hours, every morning. This is not a joke. This is literally your full-time occupation. Before alarm clocks were affordable, or reliable, British workers needed someone to make sure they didn't oversleep and lose their jobs at the mill or the factory, and that someone is you. You get paid a few pennies a week per client. Not bad if you knock for dozens of houses. Most people give you a schedule, wake me at 5, not a minute later. Some are especially needy, demanding multiple knocks in case they snooze through the first one, and trust me, they do. Because even in 1847, nobody wants to be awake before the sun. You don't shout, that's gauche. You don't throw rocks, that's criminal. You tap, softly but insistently. With a stick if it's the ground floor, with a longer stick, some up to 12 feet, for those pesky top-floor tenements. Some pros use pea shooters, blowing dried peas through a metal pipe to strike glass windows. A soft plink, plink, plink that cuts through sleep like a Victorian ringtone. You become a master of angle and breath control. You can hit a second-story pane from across the street without waking the neighbours. You could probably take out a pigeon at 50 paces if you wanted. You don't, but you could. Historical fact time. This job existed well into the 20th century. In fact, there were still knocker-ups working in parts of northern England as late as the 1950s. Think about that. World War II was over, Elvis was recording music, and some poor soul was still getting paid to poke windows with a bamboo stick at dawn. Now here's your fringe trivia. Knocker-ups had their own knocker-ups. That's right. Who wakes the waker? Someone else. Usually a colleague or maybe a family member got them up even earlier so they could do the rounds. Imagine the chain of early risers it must have taken to keep one textile factory on schedule. It's like a sleep-deprived human pyramid scheme. Of course, this was a job that required zero official training. You didn't need a license or even a particularly charming personality. But the best knocker-ups, like you, built loyal client bases. You knew who needed a gentler touch and who deserved the full artillery. Some people liked a quick knock and nothing more. Others wanted you to stand there until they waved at you from the window. Oh yes, they demanded proof of wakening, and you waited. With cold feet and wind-numbed fingers, staring up at a flickering gas lamp and wondering why you didn't just go into chimney sweeping like your cousin Harold. Here's where things get murky for the historians. No one really agrees on how this job ended. Some say alarm clocks killed it, plain and simple. Others argue that electricity and gaslighting slowly shifted sleep patterns, and people became more self-reliant. But in mining towns and rural communities, knocker-ups were cherished, and sometimes feared. Like that one woman in Blackburn who was so punctual, people swore she could see through curtains. You knock late with her and you're getting glared at in church on Sunday. You do the job year-round. Rain, bundle up, snow, extra socks, heat wave, hope for shade. You've got no sick days, no holidays, and absolutely no pension plan. But you have power. You are the gatekeeper between sleep and labour, between warm beds and cold machines. The very rhythm of the city begins with your gentle tapping. Without you, chaos. Well, missed shifts and angry foremen at least. Imagine your daily route. You know each house by feel. You start on Miller Street, where the Wilson boys need waking at 4:45. Then over to Church Lane, Mrs. Griggs at 5:10, but she pretends to be asleep because she's cheap with tips. Then the boarding house by the mill with windows all stacked like grimy dominoes. You take a deep breath and let loose with the pea shooter. 1, 2, 3, plink, plink, plink. A light flickers on. Someone swears from inside. You smile. Job well done. You may not be glamorous. No one writes sonnets about knocker-ups, but in a way, you're part of a vanishing class of workers whose jobs were invisible until they stopped doing them. You never show up in textbooks. You don't get wax figures in museums, but for decades, you were as essential as the rising sun. Eventually, maybe someone invents a cheap clock with a loud enough bell. You lose your clients, the stick gets retired. The early mornings fade, but for a while there, you ruled the streets before dawn, one tap at a time. You've done your morning window poking, sloshed through cobbled streets in boots that may or may not still be waterproof, and now it's late afternoon. Fog still clings to everything, like an unwelcome house guest. But something else is sticking in the air, something more solemn. Tonight, your work takes you out into the green, the quiet, the edge of a small village where someone has just died. Again. It happens a lot. People don't live long in this time period, and when they go, someone has to, well, do what you're about to do. You are a sin eater. Yup. That's a real job. You're the person called when someone kicks the bucket and their soul has unfinished business, mainly in the cosmic guilt department. The grieving family believes that the dead person can't cross over to whatever heavenly realm awaits until their sins are removed, and in a strange, deeply unsettling way, that's where you come in. You eat their sins. Literally. Like, with bread. Let's set the scene. It's late 1600s in rural Wales, or perhaps the English borderlands. Somewhere with more sheep than people and more ghosts than sheep. You're summoned to a cottage where the fire's barely burning, and the air tastes like old stew and sadness. The body is laid out on a table or bed, hands folded, eyes closed. A crust of bread and a bowl of ale rest carefully on the chest or beside the corpse. These are not refreshments for the mourners, they're for you. And here's what you do. You say a short prayer, sometimes whispered, sometimes just mumbled, because honestly, you've done this 100 times and it's never not weird. Then you eat the bread, drink the ale. The act is symbolic. You are, in the eyes of everyone in the room, consuming the sins of the dead, taking them on, drawing them out of the soul and into your own body like a metaphysical sponge cake of guilt. The family watches you with a mix of relief and disgust. You're doing something holy maybe, but also creepy. You're a necessary evil, an unsanctioned saviour, a spiritual garbage disposal. You're part priest, part outcast. No one sits next to you at church. No one invites you to weddings. But when death comes knocking, they come crawling. Here's your historical fact. Sin-eating was a real practice in parts of Britain up through the 19th century. It never had official church backing. In fact, it was often condemned as heretical or pagan. But that didn't stop communities from doing it. People feared the idea of a soul wandering in torment, or stuck in limbo because it hadn't unloaded its baggage. You were the final stop, the last chance for grace. Now, here's a fringe detail that's too weird to ignore. In some versions of the ritual, the bread is passed over the corpse before being eaten, like rubbed on it. Not aggressively, but enough that you're definitely not looking forward to the taste. It was believed that this action physically transferred the sins from body to bread, which then went directly to you. No butter, no jam, just cold corpse bread and warm regrets. There's a debate among scholars about where this practice originated. Some say it's a leftover from pre-Christian traditions, where symbolic food offerings bridged the living and the dead. Others argue it was a localized Christian innovation, born out of desperation in communities with no priests or proper last rites. No one really knows. The church certainly didn't keep tidy records of people shoveling guilt bread into their mouths beside decomposing villagers. And what happens to you, the sin eater? Well, let's just say your social standing is low. People believe you become spiritually toxic. You've absorbed too many sins. Some say your soul gets heavier with each job. Some believe you're cursed to carry that burden beyond death, trailing behind the people whose sins you've eaten like a dark, invisible conga line. You might be feared, pitied, or worse, completely ignored. Unless someone dies, then suddenly you're everyone's favourite pariah. You make a living though, a few pence per ritual, maybe food or lodging for the night. Sometimes you're paid in silence because technically what you're doing is frowned upon, even if it's quietly expected. There's a quiet horror to it. Every time you sit down beside a cooling body and eat in silence, you wonder, just for a second, what you're actually taking in. Was this a good person? A thief? A murderer? Someone kind? Someone cruel? Does that matter? Or are you just the last pit stop on their spiritual journey, like a cosmic toll booth with an empty stomach? You don't ask questions, you don't judge, you just chew. Sometimes, late at night, you wake up with a headache you can't explain, or a dream that doesn't feel like yours. The villagers mutter that you carry pieces of everyone you've cleansed. Some say you start to look like them over time. Your face shifts subtly, a nose here, a wrinkle there. You try not to look in mirrors, but you do the job. Someone has to. Eventually a priest arrives in the area and tries to put a stop to it. Sermons are preached, warnings are made, but when the priest is away and someone dies suddenly, guess who they call? That's right, you, with your basket of old bread and your haunted stare. And one day, maybe years from now, you die, quietly, alone, no family, no funeral, just another body in a cottage, and someone places a crust of bread on your chest, a bowl of ale, and waits to see if anyone will come to eat your sins. Spoiler, they don't. The village church bell has barely stopped tolling for the last soul you munched free, and already your mind is on the next strange gig history has handed you. You've wiped the sin crumbs from your mouth, dusted off your coat, and walked, somewhat briskly, away from a job that definitely leaves spiritual indigestion. But don't get too cosy, because now you're headed to the royal court again, or more specifically, to the royal schoolroom, where another peculiar position is waiting for you, one that defies all logic and probably every modern HR policy known to humankind. You, brave soul, are the whipping boy. Yes, that's your job title. And no, it's not symbolic. You're a young boy, roughly the same age as a prince, say 8 or 9 years old. You're born noble-ish, but not too noble. Just enough to qualify for court life, but not enough to be above being, well, whipped. Because here's the deal. The prince, by divine right and royal decree, cannot be punished physically. He's just too important. Can't have the heir to the throne getting spanked like a commoner. So when little Prince Edward throws a tantrum, calls his tutor a weasel-faced donkey, or refuses to do his Latin verbs, you get punished for him. That's not a metaphor, that's your job. You're his classmate, his companion, and his human shield. Every day you sit beside the prince, hoping to whatever saint covers small children that he's in a good mood. You do your lessons, you read your psalms, and when he acts out, the tutor turns slowly toward you. Because someone has to learn consequences. Now, this might sound like the worst position ever invented, and you wouldn't be entirely wrong, but there's a strange kind of prestige that comes with it. You're not just a random servant. You're close to the prince, like bestie close. You eat with him, you ride with him, you might even live in the palace, and over time many whipping boys become trusted advisors. It's a traumatic bonding method, sure, but trauma builds friendships, or so says the ancient British school system. Let's go to the historical record. Prince Edward VI, Henry VIII's only legitimate son, actually had a whipping boy named Barnaby Fitzpatrick. Barnaby wasn't just some ragamuffin. He was the son of an Irish noble and eventually became a member of the prince's inner circle. He was reportedly never whipped, lucky guy, but the position itself was known, documented, and oddly respected. The idea was that the prince, being responsible for your pain, would feel genuine guilt and reform his behaviour, you know, in theory. Here's the quirky fringe bit. Not all whipping boys were boys. In some households where the family lacked male companions of equal status, girls filled the role. While rare, the accounts exist. And yes, they were punished too, with the added bonus of being expected to retain all the poise and modesty of young noblewomen while enduring someone else's punishment. Childhood was a minefield back then, and there's scholarly debate on how widespread this practice really was. Some historians argue that the whipping boy is more legend than fact, an exaggerated tale to show how spoiled or sacred royal children were. Others point to court documents and letters that mention these companions directly, suggesting it was a real, if sporadically applied, position. The truth is buried somewhere between fact and folklore, but enough breadcrumbs exist to say this. If you were a prince's peer, you might have had your backside tanned more than once just to make a point. Imagine your daily routine. The sun rises over the castle walls. The prince is already shouting. He hates writing. He thinks arithmetic is for peasants. You sigh, pick up your quill, and glance at the tutor, who's glaring at you like you personally invented royal entitlement. A few minutes later, the prince flings his inkpot across the room. The tutor stands, reaches for the birch rod and says something like, "Very well, young master. Time for Master Fitzroy to feel the consequences." You stand. Again. You're not angry. Not exactly. But it stings. In more ways than one. Some days the prince gets it. He looks away. He mumbles an apology afterward. Maybe even sneaks you a sweet from the kitchens. Other days he's too wrapped up in his own little bubble of divine right and royal privilege to notice or care. You still get up the next morning, still show up to class, because if you don't, someone else might replace you, and you've seen what happens to the ones who fall out of favour. But there are perks. You hear things, big things, kingdom-level gossip. You're in the room when treaties are discussed, when royal tempers explode, when secrets are spilled over goblets of wine. You're a nobody, officially. But unofficially, you know everything. And as you grow older, if you play your cards right, this twisted little job might just launch your career. Royal trust is hard to earn, but once you've bled for it, quite literally, they tend to keep you close. Eventually the prince becomes a man, maybe even a king. You, the former human scapegoat, become his trusted advisor. You walk behind him in court, whispering strategy. You remind him of Latin phrases he still forgets. You roll your eyes when he calls you by that childhood nickname, something ridiculous like Whippy, but you let it slide, because in your own strange, bruised and well-read way you've made it. You were never supposed to matter, just a body to punish, a lesson in flesh. But somehow you became something more. And hey, at least you didn't end up as the groom of the stool. So, silver linings? You've had your fill of nobles, sin snacks and morning knockarounds, and now you find yourself standing knee-deep in a swamp that smells like wet leaves and slowly rotting things. There's a fine mist crawling over the water's surface like a bored ghost, and the reeds sway gently around you as if whispering bad life choices. Your boots squelch with every step, and your sack is heavy with squirming slimy trophies. Why? Because tonight, you're not a courtier or a scholar or a walking punching bag. Tonight you are a leech collector. Yes, a professional leech wrangler, a medical supplier, a bloodletting enabler. Your job is to go into foul, stagnant ponds and collect as many leeches as your leather satchel can hold, and then sell them to doctors, barbers, and anyone else who thinks sucking blood out of a person might improve their overall vibe. You work mostly in the countryside, where the marshes are thick and mosquito-infested, and have the exact aroma of regret. It's the early 1800s, and leech medicine is absolutely booming. British physicians believe in the balance of humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and any sign of sickness is clearly the result of having too much of something, usually blood. So naturally the solution is drain it. A little here, a little there, a teaspoon from the elbow, a pint from the ankle. For fevers, headaches, gout, pregnancy, the hiccups. Nothing says healing like a sack full of hungry worms, and someone's got to gather the little guys. That someone is you. No fancy tools, just your own body. Some leech collectors use livestock or old socks stuffed with warm meat, but you're a purist. You wade into the bog barefoot, legs bare, arms out, and stand very still. You are the buffet. You wait while the leeches latch on, slowly, silently, one by one. They wiggle under the water, drawn to your body heat, your blood, your delicious ignorance, and you let them. Because the fatter they get, the more valuable they are. You don't panic when you feel the first squirming sensation near your shin. You don't flinch when another one latches behind your knee. You just smile grimly and think about the coins you'll earn when you dump them into your wooden pail later. Then, when you've got enough black bloated passengers hanging off you to make a horror novelist weep, you carefully peel them off, drop them into your container, and move to the next pond. Here's your historical fact. In the 19th century, Britain imported millions of leeches from all over Europe to meet medical demand. But homegrown leech collectors like you were still a critical part of the supply chain. Some worked independently, others were hired by apothecaries or hospitals. The job paid terribly, caused infections regularly, and was often given to the poorest members of rural communities, especially women. And yes, that's your quirky fact for tonight. Leech collecting was often women's work. Rural women in long skirts would hike them up and wade into water, becoming walking sacrifices to a science that had never heard of penicillin. Some brought their children along, babies and toddlers, to help. Why? Because young blood attracted more leeches. I'll let you sit with that image. A barefoot child standing in a muddy bog, being slowly drained by parasitic slugs so mama can buy a sack of potatoes. There's some scholarly disagreement over how widespread this practice was. Some historians claim it was mostly local to the fens of eastern England, while others argue it was a common enough role in any lowland rural region. But everyone agrees on one thing. It was an awful, thankless job, with a daily risk of anemia, infection, and dying slowly and wet. You might think there's some dignity in being part of the healing process. After all, these leeches are considered medical tools. They're carefully selected, cleaned, and sometimes even named by overly enthusiastic apothecaries. You hear about one in Bath who keeps a prize leech in a jar and calls it Old Reliable. You try not to think about that as you wring pond water out of your shift and feel your blood pressure dropping for the third time this week. You sell your catch in the village market, a few pence for a dozen. If you're lucky, a surgeon in town needs a bulk order for some wealthy patient suffering from excess melancholy or vigorous spleen. You don't ask questions, you just hand over the jar and try not to think about where those leeches are going next, or who they're coming back from. And when you return home, limbs bitten and itchy, you pour salt over the ones that escaped and started crawling up the kitchen table. You clean your wounds, if you remember, and you sleep knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again, wading into murky water, standing still, offering your body to the squishy gods of 19th century medicine. Eventually, leech medicine declines. Germ theory becomes a thing. People start washing their hands before surgery. Radical. But leeches don't disappear entirely. In fact, they're still used today in some surgical procedures to help restore blood flow. But they're grown in labs now. Clean rooms, stainless steel counters, far, far away from the barefoot, half-starved figure you see in the mirror every morning. You were the original source, the collector, the bait and the supplier. No diploma, no respect. But without you, the whole system would have fallen apart. Also, your legs are never not scabby. After days of standing in swamps getting chewed on by glorified worms, you're ready for a break. A nice, quiet job. One where you can wear dry clothes, maybe even keep your dignity intact. And that's how you find yourself in a small candlelit cottage, hunched over an old wooden table, rubbing your temples as someone explains, for the fourth time, that yes, the toad must be alive, and no, you can't substitute a frog. You sigh, pull your satchel close and reach inside. Because now, you're a toad doctor. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. You're a folk healer, a semi-magical medical consultant, and your co-worker is a live toad, sometimes more than one, depending on how business is going. And no, you're not treating the toad. The toad is treating people. You, the toad, and a big helping of mystery are all part of a tradition that predates hospitals and continues to thrive in rural pockets of Britain deep into the 18th century. You serve your local village, where people trust you more than the educated doctor 3 towns over, who charges a fortune to bleed them out and smells like formaldehyde. They come to you for warts, fevers, bad humours, and, your specialty, scrofula. That's an old term for tuberculosis of the neck, a lovely little disease that causes swelling, pus and general horror. And when someone shows up with a lump on their throat, you don't panic. You reach for your toad. You keep it in a cloth pouch tied to your belt, sometimes a small wooden box with breathing holes. The important thing is, the toad must be alive and ideally unimpressed with its surroundings. Because to do your job right, you must tie the toad around the patient's neck. Not directly, you're not a monster. Usually you hang it in a pouch or satchel just above the swelling. The belief is that the toad will draw the disease out, absorb it somehow, and eventually die, heroically of course, taking the sickness with it. Now, historical fact check. Toad doctors really existed, especially in places like East Anglia and Somerset. They were part of the larger network of cunning folk, those rural healers and magical thinkers who occupied the awkward space between witch and doctor. They weren't licensed, but they were trusted. They didn't write prescriptions, but their methods were oddly specific. And the toad thing, documented. Multiple times, with incredible consistency, which suggests it wasn't just a one-off weird uncle situation. It was an actual, semi-respected practice. As the toad doctor, you've got a whole toolkit beyond amphibian-based fashion accessories. You carry herbs, mostly mugwort, comfrey and yarrow wrapped in linen. You know charms in Latin, even though you don't speak it. You whisper things while drawing circles in the dirt, and sometimes you spit into a bottle because someone swears it cures colic. You're half pharmacist, half conjurer. People don't entirely understand what you do, but they believe in it. Now, your quirky fringe fact. Some toad doctors dissected the toads after they died and wore the bones as protective charms, especially the toad bone thought to ward off epilepsy or ensure good luck. You'd boil the poor creature, sift through its tiny skeleton, and find the right bone. Usually the one that floated against the current in a stream. Why? No one's sure. But it was a test. If the bone fought the current, it had power. You'd then wear it in a pouch, or slip it into a child's pillow. That's the kind of job you have. One where you boil frogs and test their bones for spiritual resistance. Scholars still argue whether this was real medicine, superstition, or a little bit of both. Some think the toad, being associated with moisture and disease, symbolised the drawing out of wet illnesses like swelling or boils. Others argue it was just classic sympathetic magic. Transfer the ailment to an animal, let it take the hit. What's more fascinating is that the patients believed, and that belief often worked better than the mercury and blisters approach of modern doctors. You don't mind the strangeness. You've seen things work. A child cured of seizures, a farmer's wart vanishing overnight, a girl who stopped coughing blood after 3 days with a toad tied to her chest. Coincidence? Maybe, but you don't question it. Your cottage smells of dried herbs and damp earth. There's a small fireplace, a stack of toad boxes by the door, and a row of glass jars filled with cloudy liquids that no one but you can identify. On your shelf, next to a faded Bible, is a leather-bound book of cures, half of it copied from older books, the rest scrawled in your own messy handwriting. Recipes for healing, for warding off nightmares, for making a cow give milk again after a witch's curse. The village respects you. They don't exactly like you, but they respect you. Children whisper about your toads. Teens dare each other to knock on your door at night. But when the cough starts, or the skin boils up, or the dreams won't stop, your door creaks open, and you, calm and slightly damp, offer your services. Not all patients get better, some get worse, some die with the toad still tied to them. In those moments, people blame the disease. Sometimes they blame the toad. Rarely they blame you. You bury the used toads, quietly, in your garden, under the rowan tree. You light a candle, whisper a word, and thank them for their service. Eventually people stop coming. Maybe a new doctor arrives with bright eyes and shiny tools. Maybe you just get old. The last toad dies in its pouch. You don't replace it. You sit by the fire, watching the smoke curl, remembering the faces of the people who came to you desperate, afraid, and ready to believe. And you think, not bad for a life guided by warts and amphibians. You finally set aside the toads, boiled bones, and suspicious herbs, hoping, maybe, for a gig that involves less livestock in pouches and more walking around in clean shoes. And as luck would have it, your next job takes you right into the bustling heart of a British town, where the air is thick with chimney smoke. The streets are crammed with horses, carts, and shrieking children, and, over the din, you hear a sound. A voice. Singing, shouting. No. Calling out in a rhythm almost like a chant. Fresh muffins, hot and golden, muffins for your morning. You, my friend, are now the Muffin Man. Yes, that muffin man, the one who may or may not live on Drury Lane. And no, this isn't a children's rhyme brought to life. This is the real thing. A hard-working street vendor wrapped in layers against the morning chill, walking the alleys and avenues of 19th century London, with a tray of baked goods balanced on your head and a bell in your hand. You're not whimsical. You're not imaginary. You're trying to make rent. It's dawn, and you've been up for hours. You carry your wooden tray, a shallow box strapped over your shoulders or perched precariously on your head, filled with fresh-baked muffins. Not the cakey, sugary things you might picture today. These are English muffins, flat, yeasty, chewy rounds meant to be split, toasted and buttered until they melt in your mouth. They're warm when you set out, wrapped in cloth to hold the heat, stacked neatly like edible coins of comfort. You walk the same route every day. Wealthy houses in one direction, factory lodgings in another. Your regulars know your call, your bell and your timing. The bell is key. It's a soft, ringing chime, not too loud, not too brash. You're not a fishmonger yelling across the docks. You're the morning melody that signals breakfast is coming. Housewives peek from behind curtains. A maid leans out with a coin in hand. A child runs down the steps barefoot, clutching a copper penny, cheeks flushed with sleep. Historical fact. Muffin men were real and absolutely vital. In 18th and 19th century Britain, most people didn't bake at home. Ovens were expensive, and many homes, especially in cities, didn't have one. So they relied on vendors like you for fresh bread, muffins and crumpets. You worked under license, sometimes in organised guilds, and had to abide by strict rules, including which bells you could use. Because, and here's the weird part, the government actually regulated muffin bells. Yes, that's your fringe trivia tonight. In 1839, Parliament passed laws restricting the use of muffin men's bells. The public apparently complained they were too noisy, too frequent, and interrupted church services. Because nothing says civil unrest like the joyful clinking of breakfast pastries at 7 a.m. But the job wasn't all butter and smiles. You had to buy or make your muffins first, often working with local bakers, or baking them yourself in the middle of the night. Then you walked the city streets for hours, calling and selling, dodging dogs, carts, and the occasional thief who thought nothing of snatching a muffin right off your tray. Some people tried to sell day-old muffins as fresh. Not you. You had standards, a reputation to maintain. Of course, the rhyme doesn't help. Generations later, people will think you're a joke, a silly song, a figment of some Victorian fever dream. But in reality, you're out here in the cold, trying to sell enough muffins to feed your family and maybe, buy an extra pair of socks. Scholars debate whether the nursery rhyme was ever truly about you. Some think it started as a memory of a real vendor, turned charming through time and melody. Others believe it had a darker twist. Some claim the muffin man in Drury Lane was slang for something less innocent, possibly a slang term for a dodgy dealer of stale goods, or worse, a nickname for a child catcher, as some urban legends suggest. But most likely, it was just a catchy way to describe the familiar vendor children saw every morning through the fog. You're part of a whole ecosystem of street sellers, muffin men, pie men, eel sellers, hot chestnut vendors, each with their own songs and calls. London, Manchester, Liverpool, all sang in their own weird chorus of commerce. You might cross paths with a rat catcher or a boy selling matches. Maybe you wave to the link boy lighting lamps at dusk, his face lit by flame and soot. You nod in silent solidarity, fellow ghosts of the street. Back to your daily grind. Mid-morning is your busiest time. You sell fast. You move quick. The muffins are still warm, and if you do it right, you'll sell out before lunch. Any leftovers go cheap to taverns or servants who don't mind a bit of stale. You count your coins, tuck them in your sash, and maybe reward yourself with a pint of weak ale. If it's been a good day, you might even have enough for a new tray lining. You're not rich, you're not glamorous, but people know you. Kids run to the door when they hear your bell. Old men nod as you pass. In your own quiet, carbohydrate-fueled way, you bring warmth and routine to hundreds of homes. You're the sound of morning, the smell of dough, the first thing people look forward to when they pull their curtains open to another grey, grimy day. Eventually, technology pushes you out. Bigger bakeries take over, cheap ovens appear in homes, The bell rings one last time and no one comes to the door. But for a time, you were the reason mornings had flavour. And yes, you really did live on Drury Lane, right above the baker's shop with the window that never quite shut, where the smell of muffins still lingers, even years after the bell fell silent. You leave behind the comfort of muffins and morning bells, your tray empty and your arms finally free, only to find yourself heading into a very different kind of morning routine. One that begins just before dawn with the smell of filth and the unmistakable weight of something you really truly wish wasn't your responsibility. Because now, congratulations, you're a night soil man. Let's be perfectly clear. This is the single worst job in the entire country. There are no charming nursery rhymes about you, no little children leaning out of windows to wave, no polite nods from neighbours as you pass. In fact, most people pretend you don't exist. But when night falls over 18th century London, and every tenement and townhouse has had its daily fill of stew, ale and hard bread, you are the one who shows up to take care of what happens next. Your job is to collect human waste, by hand, from buckets. That's it. That's the gig. Here's how it works. Most homes, especially in crowded cities, don't have plumbing. Instead, they have what's known as a privy, a simple wooden box or seat with a bucket underneath. When the bucket's full, and it fills fast, it's your job to come along, remove it, and haul the contents away in large barrels. This delightful substance is called night soil because of when it's collected, and also probably because calling it anything else would make people throw up on the spot. You work under cover of darkness, not just for the name, but because it's the only time you're allowed to do your rounds. City ordinances often ban you from hauling your sloshing cargo during daylight hours, lest you offend the gentle nostrils of the upper class. So you move at night, quietly, quickly, with a lantern in one hand and a cart of doom in the other. Historical fact. The night soil system was an essential part of urban sanitation in Britain well into the 19th century. Before sewer systems were widespread, people had no choice but to rely on workers like you to literally clean up after them. It was dangerous, thankless, and as you might expect, very poorly paid. You're part ninja, part mule. You slip down alleys and narrow walkways, guided by memory more than light. You know which houses need collection on which days. Some have codes, a mark by the door, a tied ribbon, a note scrawled in chalk that says, essentially, full bucket, please, remove with haste. Sometimes the buckets overflow. Sometimes people miss their collection day and try to sneak you a bribe to take it anyway. You do, but you charge extra. And here's a quirky fringe fact. Night soil had value. Once collected, it wasn't just dumped into rivers. Well, not always. In rural areas, it was sold to farmers as fertiliser. That's right. Your cart of horror could fetch a decent price from someone growing turnips 2 counties over. There were even entire businesses built around processing night soil into a usable form, which means your job wasn't just waste removal. It was technically part of the agricultural supply chain. You were, in a very twisted way, part of the food cycle. Now, this next bit will test your stomach. Removing the buckets isn't the worst part. The worst part is when you have to clean out cesspits, brick-lined holes beneath houses that collect everything when the bucket's not in use. Some haven't been emptied in years. You climb down a ladder into the pit with a shovel and a rope and start digging. The fumes are so strong they've been known to knock people out cold. Some night soil men suffocate and die right there in the pit. Others go blind from the gases. You learn quickly to tie a rag around your face soaked in vinegar and to never ever work alone. Scholars still debate how common night soil deaths were. Some believe the horror stories are exaggerated, urban legends meant to terrify apprentices. Others point to coroner's reports and diaries that confirm, yes, people absolutely died doing this job. The Victorian obsession with sanitation came later. For now it's all rough work, whispered warnings, and holding your breath until your lungs burn. You're covered in it. Your clothes, your skin, your boots. It clings to you. The smell becomes part of you. No matter how hard you scrub, it lingers. Your neighbours avoid you. Children cross the street when you pass. Even your dog hesitates to sit near you. You sleep in a shed behind the house just to keep the peace. And yet, you have power. Quiet, stinky power. You know which households are secretly ill. You know who skips their collection schedule and which upstanding gentleman has a suspiciously large amount of material. You know the city's underbelly in a way no constable or mayor ever could. You're invisible until you're indispensable. Sometimes you work with a partner, someone to help carry the barrels, hold the ladder, or just talk to you while you shovel. The best ones have a dark sense of humour. You share horror stories, superstitions, and arguments about which borough has the worst diet. You get through the shift with grim laughter and an unspoken pact to never, ever shake hands. Eventually the city changes. Engineers dig deep and lay pipes beneath the cobblestones. Joseph Bazalgette and his sewer revolution come roaring through London like a miracle made of brick and copper. You watch as flushing toilets become fashionable, privies vanish, buckets are no longer passed down in quiet shame. Your services are needed less and less. One night you go out, bucket hook in hand, and realise no one called. No signs, no chalk marks, just quiet, empty streets. You walk home lighter than usual. The cart is empty. Your boots don't squelch. It's the beginning of the end. And though you've dreamed of retiring your shovel for years, there's a strange ache in your chest. You were part of the machine that kept the city alive. No parades, no thanks. But without you, the whole place would have drowned in its own mess centuries ago. You hang up your lantern, burn your clothes, and for the first time in your working life, you breathe deeply, immediately regret it. Just when you think history can't possibly hand you a job worse than dragging barrels of human waste through cobbled streets, it does. And this time, it involves corpses, late-night shoveling, and a very loose definition of legal. You've swapped your night soil hook for a sack and spade, and now you're operating under moonlight with your collar turned up and your nerves just barely holding. Because tonight, you are a resurrectionist, also known more bluntly as a body snatcher. Don't let the name fool you. You're not calling anyone back from the grave with candles and Latin. You're digging them up and selling their bodies to medical schools. This is Georgian and early Victorian Britain, when medicine is crawling, sluggishly, toward real science. Anatomical knowledge is in demand. Dissection is the hot new trend among doctors in training, and every medical college wants fresh cadavers for practice. But there's a catch. It's illegal to just go get one. The law only allows the bodies of executed criminals to be used for dissection, and those are in limited supply. Supply and demand get awkward. That's where you come in. Your job? Fill that gap. Literally. The process is both simple and horrifying. You work in a small crew, usually 2 or 3 trusted men. You wait until after midnight, until the cemetery is quiet and the last mourner's gone home. You carry long wooden shovels, a sack, and sometimes a crowbar. No lanterns. You work by moonlight, or not at all. You locate a fresh grave, ideally no more than a day or 2 old. The soil is still loose. The wood of the coffin hasn't fully settled. You dig fast, quietly. You don't remove the whole coffin. That's a rookie mistake. You dig just enough to expose the top end, crack it open, and pull the body out by the shoulders or armpits. No one wants the box, just the contents. Speed is everything. You're in and out in under 30 minutes if you're good. Some crews set records. You don't stop to look at the body, don't make eye contact, and definitely don't speak the name carved into the headstone. You haul the corpse, wrapped in a cloth sack, to the edge of the cemetery where a cart waits. Then you're gone. By morning, that body's lying on a slab in a university lab, ready to be examined, sliced, sketched, and eventually discarded. You get paid in cash. A full-grown adult male corpse might earn you 5 to 10 guineas. Child corpses, disturbingly, go for even more. Not because doctors are ghoulish, but because child cadavers are harder to come by. No one wants to admit it, but behind the closed doors of the operating theatre, demand doesn't discriminate by age. Now, for your historical fact, this wasn't just some shady underground practice. It was widespread, institutional. In fact, many major British hospitals and universities relied on resurrectionists for their anatomical studies. Surgeons and professors knew exactly where these bodies came from. They just looked the other way. Some even gave tips on how to dig faster or remove signs of burial. And here's your weird little fringe fact. Some professional resurrectionists carried around fake mourning clothes so they could blend in at funerals. They'd attend services, pretend to pay respects, scope out the location, and come back that night to snatch the body they'd just watched being buried. You're not just a digger, you're a con artist, a planner, a ghoul in cravat and waistcoat. Of course, the public hates you. They hate you viscerally. Word spreads fast when graves are disturbed. Mobs form. Families hire guards to watch over fresh burials. Some pay to have metal cages called mort safes installed over the graves to prevent theft. Others leave loaded shotguns with tripwires rigged to fire if anyone tampers with the soil. It's not uncommon to hear of resurrectionists losing fingers or their lives. And still, you do it. Because there's money. Because you're desperate. Because somewhere in your head, you believe that the dead don't care and the living won't find out. There's scholarly debate over whether resurrectionists saw themselves as criminals or essential workers. Some accounts suggest they genuinely believed in the advancement of medicine, that their work helped future doctors save lives. Others were in it purely for the money, grimy, dangerous cash that bought silence and whiskey in equal measure. You're good at your job. You know which cemeteries have soft soil, which ones back up to alleyways for a quick getaway, which medical students pay on time and which ones get squeamish. You keep a fake name and a real knife tucked in your boot just in case. You wash your hands obsessively, but the smell always lingers. The damp, cold, slightly sweet scent of freshly turned earth and something dark underneath. Then one day, everything changes. The public erupts over a case in Edinburgh. Two men, Burke and Hare, who take the next logical step and stop waiting for people to die. They start murdering the vulnerable and selling their corpses directly to the surgeons. That scandal rocks the medical world, and suddenly, everyone wants new legislation. It comes in 1832, the Anatomy Act. It legalises the donation of unclaimed bodies from workhouses and hospitals to medical schools. Overnight, your job becomes obsolete. Not illegal exactly, just no longer necessary. Your value vanishes. Medical students have cadavers delivered by the state now, with paperwork and everything. No more midnight digging, no more hush money in canvas bags. You hang up your shovel, burn your gloves. You can't go back to normal work. Who's going to hire the guy who used to deliver corpses like loaves of bread? You walk past a cemetery one evening, months later, and see the ground untouched, the gravestones undisturbed. You stop just for a second and stare down at the grass, wondering who lies beneath and whether you ever knew their names. You tell yourself it was just a job, but you don't go in. You step away from the graveyards, the toads, the feces buckets, and the royal rear ends, and you swear, just once. You'd like a job that doesn't involve being elbow deep in something awful. Maybe something cleaner, simpler, a trade perhaps. So you show up to a pottery workshop hoping to apprentice. You think, how bad can it be? Clay, a wheel, some bowls, maybe a mug. Then they hand you a massive mallet, point to a stack of damp clay slabs and say, "Start knocking, bottom knocker." And that's your new title, Saga Maker's Bottom Knocker. No, you're not being pranked. No, this isn't code for anything naughty. It's an actual job, with an actual purpose, and for a brief strange period in British history it's in very high demand. You work in a ceramics workshop, somewhere in Staffordshire, in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, where pottery is mass-produced by hand, sweat, soot and patience. First things first, what's a saga? It's not a typo. A saga is a protective container made of fire-resistant clay. Think of it as a tough little clay coffin that goes inside a kiln and holds delicate ceramic pieces while they fire. It shields them from ash, flames, smoke, and any other chaos that comes with high heat. Without a saga, your pottery comes out warped, blistered, or just plain shattered. And to make a saga, you need two people, the saga maker, who shapes the whole form, and you, the bottom knocker, who's in charge of creating the base of it, over and over, for hours, for days, possibly for years. Your job is to take a lump of fire clay, set it into a mould and knock it, hard, with a wooden mallet until it's smooth, flat and exactly the right shape and thickness. So yes, you spend your day pounding bottoms. You sit on a low stool beside the saga maker, your mallet calloused into your palm, clay dust in your throat and aching arms from the repetitive motion. You knock each bottom into place, hand it over and start again. It's the industrial era version of being an assembly line, except you are the machine. There's no break until the day's quota is hit, and that quota It never feels like it ends. Here's your historical fact. Pottery was one of Britain's most important industries in the 18th and 19th centuries, and the Staffordshire potteries were the epicentre. Whole towns revolved around kilns and clay, and every piece of china, every teapot, every delicate plate you see in museums today, odds are it was fired in a sagger that someone like you helped make. Bottom knockers were usually boys or young men, apprentices to the sagger makers. They were paid pennies, worked long hours, and inhaled enough clay dust to ensure they'd be coughing for the next 30 years. And now for your weird little fringe fact. Some pottery workshops used goose fat to keep the clay from sticking to the mould. You heard that right. Goose fat. Imagine sitting in a hot, airless room with a bucket of slimy animal grease beside you, slathering it over wooden moulds while your hands are raw from clay, and your nostrils full of dust. You smell like a Christmas dinner that no one wanted. The job is grueling, but if you survive the bottom-knocking years without losing a finger, getting crushed by shelves of drying ware, or developing permanent lung issues, there's a chance you'll get promoted. You could become a full-fledged sagger maker yourself, a skilled tradesman, respected, better paid, even given your own workspace. But it takes time, patience, and a truly heroic resistance to boredom, because let's be honest, it's monotonous. Knock, shape, hand over. Knock, shape, hand over. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. You can do it with your eyes half closed, and sometimes do. You daydream. You tell yourself stories. You try not to go mad listening to the groans of the kiln, the clinking of half-finished plates, and the constant dusty sound of progress grinding through the industrial age. Some scholars argue the title bottom knocker is exaggerated, an inside joke passed down through workshops and oral tradition, never officially recorded. But there are written accounts, trade documents, and local histories that mention the role explicitly. Apprenticeship contracts even list it. So yes, it's as real as it is ridiculous. You wear it like a badge. At least you're not in the mines. At least you're not ankle-deep in sewage. You've got a job that mostly stays indoors, and there's pride in that. You know the difference between fire clay and ball clay. You know how hot a kiln can get before it glows white. You know how to knock out a perfect sagger base in 30 seconds flat. You go home at night covered in clay, your hair greyed by dust, your arms sore. You dream of knocking. You hear the rhythm in your bones, and when your master finally turns to you one day and says, "Not bad, lad," it feels like being knighted. Briefly, until he hands you the next lump of clay. Eventually automation creeps in. Moulds get better. Machines are built to press and shape sagger bottoms in a fraction of the time. You teach one of the lads how to use it, then sit on your stool staring at your mallet like it's betrayed you. Still, for decades, you were part of the unsung army that made fine china possible. Every high society dinner, every dainty teacup clinked on a saucer. They all passed through a sagger, and every sagger started with a knock. You were the bottom line, literally. You dust the last bit of clay off your sleeves, say a quiet goodbye to your mallet, and leave the pottery yard behind. Your ears still echoing with the rhythmic thud of your own bottom-knocking days. This time you're hoping for something more refined, dignified even, perhaps with a coat, maybe a bell, maybe, just maybe, a little bit of mystery and melodrama. You don't get a coat. You get a bell and a job that involves announcing other people's tragic endings, because now you are the crier of the dead. Yes, that's a real thing. A walking obituary, a mobile grief broadcast system. Your job is to announce deaths, loudly, in public, on foot, and usually with a bell in one hand and a scroll in the other. If you're lucky, someone gives you a hat. This role exists in many variations throughout British history, but in its late medieval and early modern forms, it's a formal position. You're hired, either by the local parish, the town council, or the family of the deceased, to walk the streets and proclaim that so-and-so has passed from this world, often with a few added details. The name, age, occupation, and sometimes a request for prayers. Or, if it's a family with money, you're also announcing the funeral time and location, a kind of 17th century save the date, but with less RSVPing and more wailing. So you walk, slowly, methodically, ring the bell 3 times, then cry out in your most mournful voice something like, "Be it known that George Atwell, master carpenter of this parish, hath departed this mortal life on the 14th day of November. God rest his soul, and you repeat that, street by street, house by house, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, depending on the family's instructions or how crowded the obituary schedule is. It's not a performance exactly, but you're expected to sound properly sad, even if you've never met the person. Here's your historical fact. Death criers, or town criers who also announced deaths, were official roles in many British towns up through the 18th century. Long before newspapers, social media, or even standardised postal services, the town crier was how information spread. Births, deaths, lost dogs, royal proclamations, public punishments, all filtered through one trusted voice. And that trusted voice, that's you, choking back the cold air as you trudge past candlelit windows, with your bell clanging and your voice echoing off the stone walls. Your work is seasonal in a way no one wants to admit. Winter is your busy season. Sickness hits harder. The older folks fall. Accidents happen on ice. Your schedule fills up fast. Here's your fringe detail. In some rural areas, especially in the north of England and parts of Wales, you are expected to sing the death announcements. Not operatic solos, more like funeral chants or simple mournful rhymes. One popular tradition involved what was called a death song, composed specifically for the deceased, even if it was just 4 lines about their kindness, their cows, and how much ale they used to drink, which means if you had a bit of musical flair you were in demand. But let's talk reality. You don't get rich doing this. You're paid in pennies, occasionally bread, sometimes just a warm drink. In bad months, you go door to door offering your services before anyone's even asked, which is a strange thing to do when you think about it. Evening, Mum. No recent deaths in the family, I hope, but should the need arise. And not everyone welcomes you. Some find you creepy. Some think announcing death out loud invites bad luck. There are households that draw the shutters closed when they hear your bell. Others come out to listen every time, their faces grave and still, as if somehow the formality of your words makes it real. There's a rhythm to the work. Ring, step, speak. Ring, step, speak. You memorize the cadence. You begin to measure time in footsteps between doorways, in the number of announcements it takes to cross a village green. You come to know the families, the old faces, the names you dread saying next. There's no shock when someone dies. You've already noticed they didn't answer the door last time you walked by. The scholarly debate here? Whether this role was always distinct from the town crier, or just one of their many duties. Some argue that in small towns the crier wore every hat, from announcing taxes to reading out royal deaths. Others believe certain villages appointed a dedicated death crier, especially where religious customs demanded immediate notification. Either way, it was real, it was important, and it was weirdly intimate. Because here's the strange truth. You become part of people's mourning. Not a family member, not a priest, but something in between. Your voice is the signal that someone has left the world, and you do it with care. Even if you're cold, even if you're tired, even if it's the 3rd time that day, you've heard every kind of death. Quiet ones, brutal ones, the slow fade and the sudden shock. You start to sense them coming, like the weather. You can tell when the black crepe ribbons are about to go up on someone's door, and still you ring your bell, speak your piece, bow your head, walk on. Eventually, printed broadsheets, town papers, and formal obituaries replace you. People prefer to read about death over breakfast instead of hearing it shouted from the street. Your voice, once essential, is now just a curiosity. Some towns keep you around for pageantry, parades, reenactments, historical weekends where tourists cheer as you ring your bell in costume and shout about Queen Victoria's latest dinner. But you remember the real work, the cold mornings, the tight shoes, the silence that followed every announcement, and how, even in a time without telephones or texts, the entire village always knew who had passed, because you told them, with dignity, with ritual, with bell in hand, and usually with frozen toes. You trade your morning bell for something more cheerful. A pewter tankard maybe, or a half-filled wooden cup, and for once in your working life, you're about to get paid to drink. Not sneak it, not steal it, not sip it on your break. No, this time it's official, sanctioned, encouraged even. Because now you're stepping into the foamy, frothy world of the ale taster. Yes, That was a real job. In fact, in many English towns and parishes, it was one of the most important jobs. You were the taste buds of the people, the protector of pints, the sworn enemy of watery beer and shady brewers. Think of yourself as the medieval version of a quality assurance officer, except instead of clipboards and spreadsheets, your toolkit includes a flagon and the ability to distinguish good ale from something that might kill a man. Your job was to visit local taverns, inns, alehouses and breweries to test the quality and strength of the ale being sold to the public. And you weren't just some drunk off the street. No, you were appointed by the manor court, often during an annual fair or civic meeting. It was a formal duty, with rules, with an oath. You'd swear to uphold the standard of local drink and to protect the populace from watered down or over-fermented poisons. You wear a little badge on your cloak, a symbol of your authority, and everyone in town knows you. Some love you, some fear you. Mostly brewers dread your knock at the door, because if their ale is too weak, too sour, or smells like something that crawled out of a bog, you can fine them, publicly, on the spot. Historical fact time. Ale tasting was a regular part of life in medieval and Tudor England. The job shows up in parish records, manor rolls, and legal documents dating back to the 13th century. Some towns even had official measuring jugs, standardised containers to ensure no one was cheating on quantity either. As an ale taster, you were expected to test both the quality and the consistency of the ale. And if a brewer added anything weird, like soot, river water or sheep dung to change the flavour or colour, you called them out. And you didn't just taste. Oh no! You also walked the ale, which meant measuring how far it travelled from brewery to pub and making sure it hadn't gone off along the way. Ale went bad quickly, since it wasn't brewed with hops in earlier centuries, so freshness was a real concern. If something tasted off, your report could shut the whole operation down until they got it right. Now here's your quirky fringe detail. Some ale tasters were known to wear special leather breeches, yes, pants, as part of a humiliating punishment system. If a brewer was caught repeatedly cheating or selling bad ale, they could be forced to drink a full pint of their own product, then be strapped to a cart and dragged through town wearing the ale taster's pants, which had been soaked in the very ale they were caught cheating with. You, thankfully, don't wear these breeches unless absolutely necessary, but you've seen them hanging in the Guildhall, and you do not want to end up in them. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about whether ale tasters actually drank the ale, or simply smelled and inspected it. The romantic version has you sipping from tankards in shadowy pubs, judging the amber liquid like a connoisseur with a practiced swirl. But some records suggest most tastings were just a few sips, and often you didn't drink at all. You just took a whiff, looked for sediment, and watched how the ale clung to the side of the cup. Still, no one's stopping you from enjoying the occasional full pour. For research, you develop a refined palate. You can tell when the grain is burnt, when the fermentation's gone sour. You know which breweries are using too much river water, and which ones are sneakily stretching their batches with rain runoff. You learn to read the face of a nervous brewer before you even take the first sniff. Some brewers try to bribe you, slipping you a few coins or offering free samples on the side. You're tempted, sure, especially after a long walk through the muddy outskirts of town. But you remember your oath, and more importantly, you remember the time a bad batch made half the town sick and caused the vicar to vomit mid-sermon. You don't mess around anymore, but it's not all about sniffing foam and wagging fingers. Sometimes you get invited to local festivals, where you're treated like a minor celebrity. At the spring fair, you do a ceremonial first tasting of the season's ale. The crowd cheers when you nod in approval. The kids run around with wooden mugs filled with apple juice, pretending to be tasters too. You even get a flower crown placed on your head once, though that part feels a bit much. Your presence matters. In an age where clean water is a gamble, ale is the safe drink. People rely on it, not just for pleasure, but for survival. So if you fail to catch a spoiled batch, it's more than just a bad pint. It could mean illness, or worse. Eventually, hops become more common. Bottling improves. Commercial breweries rise up with their own internal testers, and the ale taster becomes less necessary. Your visits become ceremonial, a quaint tradition. You still walk the town with your badge and bell during festivals, announcing the opening of the beer tents and giving your blessing with an exaggerated sniff and a dramatic sip. But behind the flair, you remember the real work. The rotten barrels, the bar fights, the endless cups and wary looks from brewers who knew one word from you could cost them everything. You hang up your badge eventually, keep a few notes in your old ledger just for memory's sake, and every time you pour yourself a pint, you give it a little sniff, a little swirl, and say, mostly to yourself, "Now that's a good ale." Because once a taster, always a taster. You wake with the taste of ale still lingering in your mouth, and the faint memory of being applauded for drinking in public. Not bad, you think. You've earned a lighter gig, something rural maybe, outdoorsy. You're imagining apple picking, maybe shepherding a few lazy sheep around, something simple and sun-kissed. Then a man hands you a sack, a stick, and a leather glove that smells like it's been buried under a rotting mattress. He grins. You're the new rat catcher then. And just like that, your hands are back in the filth. The rat catcher is one of those jobs that makes people look at you sideways. Some admire you, some recoil. Most just wrinkle their noses when you walk by, because there's a certain aroma that sticks to a person after spending the day digging around in cellars and alleyways trying to outsmart rodents the size of small dogs. The setting is early Victorian London. The city is booming. Factories are belching smoke. Streets are filling with carriages, and the sewers are, well, mostly not working, which makes it paradise for rats. They breed in the walls, they chew through pantry doors, they spread disease, nibble on infants, no, really, and keep respectable people awake with their nightly chewing, scuttling and blood-curdling squeaks. You, lucky soul, have been hired to deal with this. Your job is to crawl into the damp, reeking underworld of the city and find them, trap them, kill them, or, more lucratively, capture them alive. Because here's the twist. Rat catching isn't just about extermination, it's also entertainment. There's a booming market for live rats, thanks to the deeply questionable Victorian pastime of rat baiting, where crowds gather to watch dogs rip rats apart in small arenas for sport. Betting is involved, cheering happens, sometimes people bring snacks, and the rats, supplied by people like you. So your day begins with a lamp, a sack, and an iron rod. You head into kitchens, basements, butcher shops, anywhere that smells like blood and flour and spilled beer. You listen. You watch. You press your ear to the wall. When you hear the faint scratching of tiny claws behind the plaster, you set your trap. Some rat catchers use terriers, snappy little dogs trained to sniff out and bite down fast. Others use ferrets, slipped into tight holes to flush rats into the open. You're old school. You carry a cage and a stick and a slice of cheese that's seen better days. You catch dozens on a good day. You drown some, kill others. The rest you sell to the local pub that runs rat-baiting events every Thursday night. They keep them in a cellar, in rough wooden cages, fattening them up for the next big fight. Here's your historical fact. Rat catching was a genuine, essential job throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. In fact, government buildings employed full-time rat catchers to keep the vermin under control. The British Houses of Parliament had one, so did the Royal Mint. And when outbreaks of plague or cholera threatened the city, rat catchers became sudden heroes, at least until the smell hit. And now, your fringe fact. The most famous rat catcher in British history was a man named Jack Black, official rat catcher to Queen Victoria. Yes, that was a real title. He wore a top hat adorned with a dead rat, carried cages of live ones through the streets like a travelling showman, and bred special colour mutations to sell as pets. He's widely credited with popularising fancy rats, those cute little cage rats that would later become beloved pets. So yes, your profession helped invent the pet store aisle. But let's be honest, you're no gentleman in a top hat. You're in the grime, sleeves rolled up, crawling under floorboards with a candle clenched between your teeth. You've been bitten twice this week. Once on the thumb, once somewhere less appropriate. You've got scratches on your arms, and your clothes carry the unmistakable musk of fear and rat urine. You know the city's underbelly like no one else. Which alleys flood with vermin after rain, which bakeries are secretly hiding infestations, which cellars haven't been swept in years. You keep maps in your head, not of streets or buildings, but of nests, deep, hidden colonies of rats that breed in the dark and pour out at night like a wave of fur and teeth. You hear stories, always stories, about giant rats, 2 feet long, with glowing eyes and human-like screams. About rats that work in packs, luring cats into traps. About rats with bells on their tails, put there by madmen. You laugh them off. But sometimes, when you're alone in a tunnel and the candle flickers just right, you wonder, scholars still debate how much rat catchers contributed to actual disease control. The popular theory that rats caused the Black Death has been revised. Some now think fleas on humans were the real culprits. But in crowded, filthy cities, anything that removed vermin helped. You made homes safer, food cleaner, sleep quieter. Of course, you're also part of the entertainment industry. Rat baiting is popular until it's banned in the mid-1800s, and by then, many rat catchers are already fading from necessity. Sewers improve. Poison becomes widespread. Rats get cleverer, or maybe just luckier. Eventually you hang up your sack, retire your stick, maybe keep a rat or two in a little hutch by the window, just for old time's sake. You teach the local kids how to spot the signs: chewed grain sacks, missing crumbs, scratch marks on wood. You tell them about the time a rat got into your boot while you were wearing it. Their faces go pale. You laugh. You were never glamorous, never clean. But for a long, grim stretch of British history, you were the last line of defence between civilization and squeaking, gnawing chaos. And somewhere out there, in the darkness under a cobbled lane, a rat still remembers your scent and runs the other way. You thought you'd escape the stench this time. You really did. After all, how bad can flowers be? You hear whispers of a court job that's fragrant, delicate, and possibly involves lounging around in a lovely gown with a posy in hand. You sign up immediately, because at this point, anything that doesn't involve buckets, claws, or shovels sounds like a dream. So imagine your surprise when you're handed a basket of petals, a silk apron, and a polite but firm warning not to fall behind. Welcome to your new role, Queen's Herb Strewer. Yes, it's as dainty as it sounds, and also, somehow, not. It's not just flowers and flirting in gardens. It's a job that combines botany, court ritual, and low-key deodorizing. You are responsible for scattering herbs and fragrant petals along the routes the monarch is about to walk, both indoors and out. Think of it as an early version of air freshener, only much more theatrical and expensive. Your job is to walk slightly ahead of the Queen, delicately tossing herbs and blossoms underfoot, creating a perfumed path wherever she goes. Corridors, throne rooms, gardens, banquet halls, even the streets outside during grand processions. Every step the monarch takes is supposed to be cushioned with fragrance and symbolism. And yes, there is symbolism. Everything in court life has layers. You don't just chuck random leaves around. Each herb has a meaning. Lavender for cleanliness, rosemary for remembrance, rose petals for beauty, chamomile for calm, and of course, sweet marjoram and strewing rushes, the unsung heroes of bad-smelling Tudor hallways. Here's your historical fact. The position of herb strewer dates back to at least the 17th century, and for a time, it was an official role in the royal household. The most famous holder of the title was Miss Mary Rayner, appointed in 1820 for the coronation of King George IV. She wore a silver-gilt coronet and a dress embroidered with wildflowers, leading the monarch's entrance through Westminster Abbey like a walking garden. Now here's the less glamorous truth. This job wasn't all petals and poetry. You were fighting against the worst smells imaginable. The royal court may look elegant in portraits, but beneath the velvet and lace was a tidal wave of human funk. There was no modern plumbing. Bathing was infrequent, food was rich, and digestion was passionate. Court dogs ran wild, courtiers fainted regularly from heat, illness, or just the smell. So you, as herb strewer, were the olfactory front line. You start your day gathering herbs, either from the royal gardens or from apothecaries who know your preferences. You sort them carefully, cutting stems, drying leaves, tying bunches together with ribbon. The petals must be soft and freshly plucked. No wilted marigolds or stale sage. The Queen must always smell freshness, as if walking through the gates of Eden. You're also expected to have floral knowledge. This isn't just for show. You might be called upon to choose herbs that align with a royal event. A peace treaty, add olive branches, a funeral, cypress, a wedding, white roses and honeysuckle. You become a kind of whispering gardener. Your work felt more than seen. And sometimes, just sometimes, someone thanks you for it. Here's your fringe fact for the night. During large ceremonies like coronations, the amount of herbs used could reach into the hundreds of pounds. Sacks and sacks of petals, leaves, stems, and dried flowers were scattered across abbeys and palaces to mask the sweat, of thousands of guests crammed into stone halls. It was less gentle flower girl and more logistics expert for the Great Botanical Offensive. Of course, the Queen doesn't speak to you directly. She glides by, inhaling the gentle scent trail you've laid down like a perfumed breadcrumb path. But you see the reaction in her face, the slight softening of her eyes as lavender hits her nose. That, for you, is the win. Still, there are mishaps. Once, someone uses too much pennyroyal, and the Queen nearly sneezes mid-procession. Another time, the royal hound rolls in your carefully laid path, creating a trail of crushed mint and matted fur. And once, disastrously, a careless courtier steps on your basket and crushes the jasmine supply 10 minutes before a banquet. You make do with rosemary, no one notices, except you. Scholars debate the long-term value of the herb strewer role. Was it ceremonial fluff, or did it genuinely improve conditions in the court? Some argue the herb strewers were proto-sanitarians, creating cleaner air in crowded, unhygienic spaces. Others say the job was mostly symbolic, tied to old superstitions about warding off illness through scent. Either way, you're there, doing the work, bouquet by bouquet. You take pride in it. Your hands smell constantly of lemon balm and thyme. Your aprons are stained green. Your shoes are soft with petals. You walk with a certain rhythm, almost like a dance, casting herbs to the left and right in gentle arcs as your Queen follows behind. Eventually, like so many court roles, the job fades. Plumbing improves. Ventilation becomes a thing. Scented candles and perfumes take over. No one needs a person to walk ahead of the monarch tossing marigolds like rice at a wedding. You retire quietly, keeping your herb knife and a pressed sprig of lavender in a tiny book of poems. But whenever someone walks into a room and sighs, "Ah, it smells lovely in here," you smile. Because once upon a time that was your job. You've left the perfumed walkways of the palace behind, your apron still dusted with crushed thyme and wilted petals, and now you're back in the real world. The smelly, muddy, slightly chaotic world. There's no lavender here, no embroidered gowns. Just you, a large wooden staff, and the unmistakable sound of squealing pigs in the distance. Because your next job? You're a hog reeve, the closest thing 18th century Britain had to a pig cop. It sounds ridiculous. Honestly, it is ridiculous, but it's also 100% real. You are the town's official enforcer of pig law. Yes, pigs. Running amok, escaping pens, snuffling through market stalls, rooting in graveyards, and when that happens, when all pork-based chaos breaks loose, you are the one the town sends to restore order. Let's back up. In rural and small-town Britain, pigs are everywhere. They're cheap to keep, easy to fatten, and will eat literally anything, including, unfortunately, things they shouldn't. They're left to roam free during certain seasons, feeding on acorns in the forest or waste in the streets. And while this sounds kind of charming, it absolutely isn't. Because pigs are smart, and they're destructive. One minute they're minding their business, the next they're charging into someone's cabbage patch, digging up a churchyard, or biting a child's ear off in the village square. So the community needs someone to watch over them, someone with authority, someone who knows how to handle a 200-pound boar with attitude issues. That's you. You start your day patrolling the village with your pig stick, a long forked staff designed to guide and prod unruly swine without usually injuring them. You check fences, you inspect sty conditions, you note which pigs are wandering unsupervised and which owners are cutting corners. Your job is part livestock management, part community oversight, part weird medieval neighbourhood watch. And yes, it comes with power. If you catch someone's pig loose in public, you can issue a fine. Not massive, usually a few pence, but enough to sting. If you catch the same pig loose again, you can seize it, confiscate the hog, impound it. There's even a holding pen near the edge of town, a little piggy jail if you will, where you keep repeat offenders until their owners pay up. Here's your historical fact. The hog reeve was a genuine and sometimes elected position in many British parishes, and had even crossed the Atlantic into early colonial America. Records from the 17th and 18th centuries mention hog reeves specifically by name, especially in agricultural communities where livestock management was everyone's business. The job often went to someone respected, responsible, and just slightly intimidating, which, judging by your scowl and boots, you qualify for nicely. Now here's your quirky fringe fact. In some towns, the hog reeve was expected to mark the offending pigs, by notching their ears or painting their sides with tar, so everyone would know which pigs had been caught breaking the rules. Think of it as medieval pig shaming. And if you caught someone trying to remove or disguise your mark, that was a whole other offence. You could haul them before the manorial court and accuse them of tampering with official hog identification. It doesn't get more British than that. Of course, not everyone appreciates your efforts. You get sneered at in the tavern. Some farmers call you names behind your back. And children occasionally follow you around oinking until you wave your staff in their direction. But you hold your ground. You've broken up pig fights. You've dragged squealing hogs out of kitchens and even once out of a church during a funeral. You've seen things. There's scholarly debate about how formalised this role truly was. Some argue it was just a name given to whoever was unlucky enough to live closest to the town's main sty. Others claim it was part of a larger rural system of agricultural oversight, right up there with Haywards, who protected crops, and Reeves, who collected taxes. Whatever the case, your role is vital, if often unglamorous. Without you, pigs reign supreme. You develop a sixth sense for mischief. You know the troublemakers by name. Betsy, the oversized sow from the blacksmith's yard who keeps digging up the vicar's garden. Hamfast, yes, someone actually named their pig that, who once made it halfway into the mayor's pantry before you tackled him like a rugby player in the mud. You've started carrying extra rope just in case. But your job isn't all crisis response. It's also about prevention. You educate villagers, give advice on fencing, suggest feed options that keep pigs more placid, less beer, more oats. You even organise the occasional sty inspection, showing up unannounced with your little notebook and a serious expression. You'd be surprised how many people try to hide pigs when they hear you're coming. Pro tip, pigs do not hide well. Still, your role is slowly becoming obsolete. As land gets enclosed and farming becomes more structured, the days of free-roaming pigs begin to fade. People build better fences. They stop letting livestock wander through the town square like it's a petting zoo. The job of Hog Reeve starts to feel like a ceremonial holdover from another time. Eventually someone jokes that your title should be changed to Pig Advisor. You don't laugh. One day, a shiny new bylaw comes down from the town council. Pigs must be penned at all times, no exceptions. You read it, sigh, and tuck your staff behind the door. You still check the fences from habit. Still walk the town with your boots scraping against the cobblestones, listening for the distant grunt of rebellion. But the pigs stay put. The village grows quiet, and your services, once so urgently needed, are no longer required. You retire in peace, haunted only occasionally by the echo of squeals on the wind, and by the memory of that one pig who figured out how to climb stairs. You've spent enough time chasing pigs around graveyards and apologising to priests for livestock interruptions to know one thing for sure. You're due for a quieter gig. Something dignified. Something that doesn't involve animal droppings. So when you hear there's work available in a noble household escorting young masters around the park, you think, finally. A bit of walking, a bit of polite conversation. How hard could it be? Very hard, actually. Because now, you're a walking boy, a human alarm system for aristocratic children. Here's the scene. It's the late 1700s, and you work for a wealthy family who owns more waistcoats than common sense. Their son, young master whatever his name is of an age where he needs regular exercise and daily strolls through the fashionable squares of London. But God forbid he breaks a sweat or, heaven help us, gets mugged. So he's accompanied by a walking tutor or footman, someone responsible for his moral and physical development during these constitutionals. And you walk ahead of them. Sometimes 15 feet, sometimes more. You're not a tutor. You're not even allowed to make eye contact with the boy half the time. Your job is to walk just far enough ahead to warn them if anyone undesirable is approaching, be it a beggar, a chimney sweep, a loose dog, or a poor person with too much eye contact. You are the social buffer zone, the walking red flag, the world's most polite lookout. Your main tool is your voice. When you see something mildly threatening, a dirty carriage driver perhaps, or a man selling eels too enthusiastically, you turn and call back to the tutor or footman, "Step left, sir," or "Take caution ahead." Sometimes just, "Careful, pavement irregular." You sound like a human Yelp review from 1794, but it's important. Because if little Lord Sniffington is startled by a street vendor shouting about hot pies, someone's going to complain, loudly, and probably write a letter. Here's your historical fact. Upper-class families in 18th and 19th century Britain often employed entire teams to manage their children's appearances in public. Walking boys were a lesser-known but well-documented part of that system. While governesses and tutors handled education, walking boys provided presence and preparation, their role somewhere between bodyguard, valet, and advance warning system. Diaries and household records show payments made to young boys for walking duties, especially in cities like Bath and London. You're often no older than the child you walk for, maybe a few years senior, usually from a poorer background. You wear a uniform coat and a stiff cap, and you're taught to walk briskly, back straight, with just the right blend of attention and invisibility. You never whistle, you don't look at the maids too long, and under no circumstances do you allow your young master to witness a public scuffle, a drunken dispute, or, worst of all, someone using slang. It's not all streets and vigilance. Sometimes you help choose the route, subtly guiding your group past the more scenic parts of town, avoiding puddles, skipping neighbourhoods that smell wrong, and heaven forbid you forget the umbrella on a cloudy day. That's half your wages gone. Your quirky fringe fact. Some walking boys were trained to recognise smells and call them out before the delicate noses of the elite were offended. You'd get an extra halfpenny if you could identify bad air in advance, like rotting vegetables from a market stall or the sulphur stink from a tanner's shop, and redirect accordingly. That's right, you were paid to smell your way down the street like a particularly refined bloodhound. But it's not just about avoiding smells and puddles. This is status maintenance. The walk itself is a performance. The child walks upright, the tutor strolls just behind, and you, the walking boy, set the tone. If you walk too fast, you're scolded. Too slow, you're scolded. If you let anyone speak directly to the child, you're scolded and probably demoted to something involving chamber pots. There's scholarly debate about whether walking boys were ever more than servants with a fancy name. Some historians argue that the role was purely ceremonial by the Victorian period, a leftover relic of Georgian fussiness. Others believe the job evolved into more formalised positions in households, like footmen or pages. But during its heyday, the walking boy was a quiet linchpin of aristocratic peace of mind. You get good at reading people from a distance. You know when a coach driver's about to lose control, when two men in wigs are about to start yelling. You notice everything, before anyone else does. Your eyes flick from street signs to shop windows to lamp posts. You memorise the steps around every corner, where the cracks are in the paving stones, where the flower girl likes to stand, and whether she's having a particularly shouty day. There are good days, sunny ones, when the child behaves and the streets are quiet and the sky smells like nothing at all. On those days, you get a nod from the tutor, maybe even a coin slipped into your palm at the end of the walk. You go home proud, you did your job, no tears, no complaints, no unexpected fishmongers jumping out at anyone. But there are bad days too, cold, wet ones. When the child is whiny, the tutor is hungover, and a passing beggar gets too close. That's when you're blamed. You should have seen it coming. You should have rerouted. You should have been psychic, apparently. You learn to shrug it off. You watch. You listen. You step ahead again. Eventually the job fades. Streets improve. Cities get cleaner. The middle class rises, and no one has time or money for a dedicated child walker. Families go out less. They hire carriages instead. Walking becomes private. You take up other work. Maybe porter, maybe footman, maybe something worse. But you'll always have that strange stretch of years when your job was to walk ahead of another human being. Not leading, not following, just watching out. Like a shadow, with excellent posture. You've walked the polished squares of London with a noble brat trailing behind you, your shoes clicking on cobblestones while your eyes scanned for threats like a Victorian meerkat. But now the city calls you again, only this time you're not pacing in front of powdered children. You're heading into the bowels of London, deep below the streets, under the gas lamps and rat-choked gutters, into the dripping, reeking unknown. Because today, you are a tosher, a sewer treasure hunter. Yes, really. In the darkest underbelly of Victorian Britain, a hidden profession thrived. Men and boys who waded through the sewers, up to their knees or waists in the city's raw waste, searching for anything that might have been lost or discarded down a drain. Buttons, coins, jewellery, scrap metal, bone, rope, shoe buckles, broken bits of cutlery. You name it. You found it floating past your boots or buried in the sludge. You're not an adventurer, you're a scavenger, and London is your swamp. You start your shift at dusk when the city's winding down, but the sewers are very much awake. There's a whole network of ancient tunnels beneath your feet, brick-lined, stinking, echoing like cathedrals of decay. You've memorised the map of this underground world in your head. You know which manhole covers can be lifted without alerting the watch, and which tunnels always have shin-deep flow and slightly better lighting from the grates above. Your gear? Modest. A long pole with a hook on the end, a lantern, a heavy bag strapped across your back, maybe some patched-up boots, though many go barefoot because at a certain point you just stop caring, and a thick belt with loops for holding tools. You descend carefully, breathing through your mouth, your boots immediately slurping into the wet mess that clings to everything. Here's your historical fact. Toshas were real and very active in 19th century London. The word tosha itself appears in reports from the 1830s onward, and many worked at night to avoid police and to stay ahead of the rising tide of official sewer workers. Despite the risk, the job was popular among the desperate. The city's underbelly was a gold mine if you could stomach the stench, dodge disease, and avoid drowning. Yes, drowning. Because sometimes the sewers would surge without warning, especially during rain. If a storm rolled in, the water levels could rise rapidly and sweep you away, smashing your skull against a tunnel wall before you had a chance to scream. That's why you always listen, always sniff. You get to know the warning signs, a certain pressure in the air, a change in the echo, a slight gurgling that means run. Your fringe fact tonight? There were tosha gangs, groups who claimed certain sewer routes as their turf. Rival groups would brawl in the tunnels, swinging hooks and clubs, fighting over a coin lodged in the muck. Some toshas even carried knives, not for defence against rats, which you rarely fear, but to settle disputes with rival scavengers. It wasn't just dirty work, it was dangerous business. There's a kind of rhythm to your job. You lower yourself into the main tunnel, knee-deep in something no poet has ever written about. You sweep the hooked pole along the edge where the flow slows. Coins gather there. Little treasures, caught in the nooks and eddies of the city's waste stream. You snatch them, toss them into your bag and move on. Sometimes it's brass, sometimes it's silver. One time, it was a finger still wearing a ring. You didn't ask questions. Toshas are invisible in the eyes of the city. People don't speak of them in polite company. If they see you climbing out of a sewer grate at dawn, dripping with foulness, they pretend not to. You're a shadow creature. A myth. A smell that walks. But the truth is, you know the city better than anyone. From the docks to the palace, you've crawled beneath it all. You've seen what gets flushed, tossed, or lost. You've learned that the wealth of the upper classes eventually ends up in the same place as everything else, circling the drain. Some days, you do well. A silver thimble, a dropped pocket watch. You sell them to a fence by the docks, someone who doesn't care about provenance or filth. You get enough for bread, a bottle, maybe even a clean shirt. Other days, just scraps of copper wire and a nasty cut on your ankle from broken glass. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about the Tosha's legal status. Were they criminals, freelancers, urban folk heroes? Technically, entering the sewers without permission was illegal, trespassing on government property. But enforcement was lax, and when pressed, most authorities preferred to let the Toshas be. After all, they were cleaning up the mess, in a roundabout way. Eventually things change. The sewers are re-engineered, massive projects under the direction of men like Joseph Basil Gett, who bring sanitation and order to the chaos. Access becomes restricted, manholes are locked, floodgates added, and slowly the Toshas disappear. Some become sanctioned workers, cleaning the new systems in uniforms. Others vanish into other trades or into the tunnels one last time, never to return. You hang up your hook one morning after a narrow escape. The water came too fast. The footing was bad. You lost your lantern. You surfaced coughing black water and decided that was enough. But you never forget it. The thrill of finding a silver shilling wedged between two bricks. The strange beauty of gaslight filtering through a drain. The silence down there, no shouting, no judgment, just the city's hidden pulse. And whenever someone drops a coin into a street grate and swears under their breath, you smile, because once upon a time, you would have been the one waiting to catch it. You've crawled through sewers, outwitted rats, and dodged raw sewage like it was a sport. You deserve something different now, maybe still dirty, but with a bit of excitement. And so, naturally, your next job involves carrying high explosives across a warship while people scream at you to hurry. That's right. You're now a powder monkey, which sounds like a pub game or a circus trick, but is in fact a real naval role, with the least comforting job description in British military history. Run gunpowder to cannons during battle, and try not to explode. Welcome aboard, sailor. The year is somewhere between 1750 and 1815, peak age of sail. Britain's Royal Navy is the terror of the seas, fighting off French fleets, Spanish armadas, and the occasional American upstart. These are the days of wooden warships, billowing sails and broadsides that thunder across the water. And beneath the deck, amid the screaming and smoke, you are the one sprinting back and forth with canvas bags full of powder, feeding the hungry cannons like they're fire-breathing beasts. You're usually between 12 and 14 years old, because let's be honest, adults are too slow and you're small enough to dart through the cramped, chaotic gun decks. The job is simple but terrifying. Grab a bag of black powder from the ship's magazine, the highly protected, tightly sealed room deep below the waterline where all the gunpowder is stored, and run it up to the gunners as fast as possible. No open flames, no sparks, just adrenaline, sweat, and the constant awareness that one false move could detonate the ship. Here's your historical fact. Powder monkeys were a real and essential part of naval warfare during the 17th through early 19th centuries. On ships like HMS Victory or HMS Indefatigable, dozens of boys were employed in this role, each assigned to specific guns during combat. They had to be fast, quiet, and precise, especially since battles could last for hours, and gun crews fired as rapidly as possible, often every 2 to 3 minutes. You carry the powder in cartridges, cloth bags tied shut with string, measured carefully so each cannon gets the right load. Too little, and the cannonball drops like a stone. Too much, and the gun might explode. You don't ask questions, you just run. Before a battle, you're ordered below to the magazine, stripped of your shoes. Yes, barefoot, because even the scrape of a boot on the wooden deck could spark a fire. The magazine is lined with copper and lit only through a sealed glass pane from another room to prevent open flames near the powder. It's quiet there, cold and still, but you know that above you, the world is preparing to tear itself apart. Then the call comes. All hands to battle stations. The first boom rattles the floorboards above you. You grab a cartridge, clutch it to your chest, run up the narrow ladder into smoke and screaming. The gunners yell, cannons thunder. You feel the whole ship lurch, sideways. Someone slips and blood smears across the deck. You don't stop. You don't think. You run back down, grab another cartridge, and do it again. Now here's your quirky fringe fact. In some navies, powder monkeys were also tasked with climbing the rigging to relay signals or helping with sails during battle, if they weren't busy with powder runs. Imagine switching between dodging cannonballs and dangling 60 feet above deck in a gale, just because someone forgot a flag code. You sleep in a hammock strung low in the gun deck, your entire world swaying with the ocean. There's little privacy. The ship stinks of sweat, brine, and old rope. Rats scurry through the biscuit bins. You eat salt pork, hardtack, and peas boiled until they're grey. Sometimes you get rum, but only a little. You're too young to be officially on the ration, but no one really checks during battle. You learn fast. How to keep your balance in a rolling storm. How to duck at the right moment. How to keep the powder dry. How to ignore the screams when a cannon misfires and takes a man's arm with it. You become part of the ship's heartbeat, small, fast, invisible, until you're needed. There's scholarly debate about how many powder monkeys survived long naval careers. Most were either killed in action, maimed, or pressed into other duties as they aged. Some were trained to become sailors, gunners, or officers' servants. But many simply aged out and were dumped at the next port with a few coins and a story no one wanted to hear. Your hands are always black with powder. Your ears ring even when the ship is still. You've seen ships sink, men thrown overboard, sails torn to shreds by shot and storm. And you've done all of this barefoot, half-starved, and a full foot shorter than most of the crew. But despite everything, there's pride in it. You were part of something huge, terrifying, yes, but real. Your small frame helped fire the guns that turned the tides of battles. Without you, the cannons fell silent. Without you, the gunners were useless. Eventually, when your legs are longer and your voice breaks, they reassign you. No more powder, no more barefoot runs through the belly of the beast. Maybe you scrub decks now, or man the sails, or clean out the captain's chamber pot. It's not glamorous, but it's safer. And on quiet nights, when the sea is calm and the sky clear, you sit by the railing, legs dangling over the side, and remember the roar of battle, the weight of powder against your chest, the way the whole ship would tremble when the guns let loose in unison. You may have been called a monkey, but you were the one who fed the lion. You've survived the roar of cannon fire, the ache of barefoot sprints across splintered decks, and the permanent soot smudge across your palms that no amount of scrubbing can fix. You decide it's time to return to dry land and maybe, just maybe, get involved in something a little quieter, something helpful, healing even. And so, after years of chaos, you now find yourself in a smoky cottage at the edge of a mossy village, hunched over a fire while a woman in a tattered shawl explains how to draw out a fever with a bowl of milk and some burnt rosemary. You're not working for a doctor, you are the doctor. Sort of. Because now, you've stepped into the peculiar liminal role of a cunning woman. She's not a doctor in the licensed, university-trained sense, of course. She's something older, stranger, equal parts healer, midwife, therapist, herbalist, and, depending on who you ask, sorceress. In rural Britain, for hundreds of years, when people couldn't afford a physician, or just didn't trust one, they turned to the cunning folk, and now you are learning the trade. Your cottage smells like dried sage, damp wool, and just a hint of cat pee. There are bundles of herbs tied to the rafters, animal skulls on shelves, and drawers full of things like beeswax, lavender, vials of God knows what, and a bundle of something you're afraid to touch. The line between medicine and magic is thin here, woven with folk traditions, bits of Latin, and a heavy dose of regional superstition. People knock at your door all day long, for everything: warts, fevers, a cow that won't give milk, a child with night terrors, a husband who won't stop gambling, a neighbour who looks at them funny. They all want a cure, a charm, a word of advice, or sometimes revenge. You've got an answer for each of them, some grounded in old herb lore, some pulled straight from the realm of just keep them busy and hopeful. You hand a woman a sachet of thyme and mugwort wrapped in muslin and tell her to bury it under the moon to ease her headaches. You whisper an old rhyme to a crying farmer whose fields keep failing. You watch a man walk away with a blessed chicken bone in his coat pocket, swearing he already feels lighter. Here's your historical fact. Cunning women and cunning men were widespread throughout Britain from the Middle Ages into the 19th century. They existed in nearly every village, especially before formal medical care became accessible. And while the church frowned on them, and the authorities sometimes arrested them, communities often fiercely protected their cunning folk. These were people you went to when no one else could help. But here's your fringe, lesser-known twist. Some cunning women didn't just heal, they helped with legal curses. People would come to you asking how to undo a hex, yes, but also how to deliver one. You weren't supposed to encourage it, but let's just say you sometimes sold them a charm and left the intention up to interpretation. A little clay doll here, a lock of hair tucked into a jar there. It's all very hush-hush. You're a healer after all, but also, results matter. You help with childbirth too. You've caught more babies than you can count. Your hands are steady even when the mother screams and the father faints into the firewood pile. No fancy tools, no sterile gloves, just boiled linens, boiled water, and a prayer whispered as the baby's crown emerges. You're midwife, mother, and miracle worker all at once. And yet, your reputation is complicated. Some people call you an angel. Others cross themselves when you pass. You're not entirely trusted, even if you're needed. Children whisper stories about you, claiming you fly at night or talk to animals. One boy swears he saw you turn into a hare. You don't confirm or deny it. The mystery keeps you in business. Scholars today still debate how much of what cunning women did was genuine medicine versus belief-based placebo, But the truth is, even when it wasn't effective by modern standards, it often worked, because it was rooted in ritual, familiarity, and the simple power of someone listening and trying. In communities where doctors were far away or suspiciously fond of leeches, a visit to the local cunning woman brought comfort, hope, control. You keep a careful balance. If you're too quiet, people forget you. If you're too bold, they call the vicar. You help both sides of a feud. You never play favourites. You protect your reputation like it's gold. But still there's risk. Sometimes a baby dies, and the family looks at you sideways. Sometimes a sickness doesn't lift, and someone mutters the word witch. You've seen friends, other women with calloused hands and herbal knowledge, dragged into court, accused of dealing with the devil. You keep your head down, keep your practice small. You don't own much. A kettle, a chipped teacup, a black cat with one eye who may or may not be magical. But you've got knowledge, the kind passed down through whispers and worn pages. You know how to stop bleeding with cobwebs, how to reduce fever with elderflower, how to predict a storm by the way your bones ache. No one taught you this in a school. It came from your mother, her mother, and the strange old woman who lived in the woods when you were a child. Over time, your hands grow gnarled, your back stiff. But people still come, still knock, still stand awkwardly in your doorway, holding a sack of potatoes or a clutch of eggs, begging for help. You'll keep going until you can't, and when you're gone, someone else will take your place. Some young girl with too much curiosity and not enough fear. She'll find your old recipes tucked into the rafters, your bundles of dried plants crackling with age. She'll feel it, that pull. The sense that healing isn't just about science, it's about story, belief, the human need for someone to say, I have something that might help. And the world will whisper again, she's one of the cunning folk, just like you were. You hang up your pouch of dried herbs and tuck the last bit of rue and lavender into the rafters, hoping the next soul who finds them knows what they're doing. You've healed, hexed, and hummed your way through the tangled beliefs of countryside life, and now you're ready for something simpler, something mechanical maybe, something that doesn't involve whispering over milk bowls or boiling roots under the moon. What you get instead is a small, nervous-looking dog staring at a giant metal wheel. Because now you are the proud trainer, operator, and part-time emotional support companion of the turnspit dog, or, more precisely, you are the person in charge of making sure that the dog keeps turning the meat. Yes, it's real. You work in a wealthy household or large inn, and your job is to oversee a very specific kind of canine labour. Tucked beside the roaring hearth is a wooden wheel, like a hamster wheel but sturdier and grimier, connected by gears and ropes to a spit over the fire. The spit holds a roast, usually beef, sometimes game, and that wheel, it needs to turn. Enter the turnspit dog, a specially bred, long-bodied, short-legged dog with endless stamina and very few life choices. And you're the one who gets him moving, keeps him motivated, and makes sure he doesn't just sit in the wheel and cry while the roast burns. Your job begins before sunrise. The kitchen is already a frenzy of sweating cooks, clanging pans, and the occasional burst of swearing when someone drops a tray of eels. You check the firewood, check the spit, and then retrieve the dog. You keep him in a small box by the hearth at night, which sounds awful, and is. But the dog knows the drill. He's done this before. He gives you a look that says, I would unionize if I could, and you gently place him into the wheel. Then he runs, or rather, he trots, steady, focused, mechanical. As the wheel turns, the spit turns, and the meat slowly cooks, evenly browning all sides. If the dog slows down, you tap the side of the wheel with a stick. Not hard, just enough to remind him of the hierarchy in this absurd little system. Here's your historical fact. Turnspit dogs were a very real breed, used in British kitchens from at least the 16th century through the early 19th. The breed was often called the Vernapata cur, and they were selectively bred for endurance and size to fit inside the wooden wheels. They were working animals like sheepdogs or hunting hounds, but instead of herding or fetching, they were trained to roast dinner. And here's your quirky fringe detail. Some households had 2 turnspit dogs so they could rotate them. One would work the wheel while the other rested, and then they'd switch out mid-roast. Imagine explaining to a modern animal welfare inspector that you had a literal shift schedule for your dogs, complete with breaks and rotations. Some owners even put small pieces of warm meat in the rest box to keep the off-duty dog motivated. You don't just manage the dog, you maintain the whole roasting process. You check the meat constantly, baste it with dripping, and adjust the coals. The dog's pace directly affects the outcome. If he gets tired and slows down, the roast cooks unevenly. If he runs too fast, usually after being startled by a particularly loud clatter, it could overcook on one side. Eventually you learn your dog's moods. You name him something grimly affectionate like Trotter or Drizzle. You talk to him as he runs, not because you're sentimental, okay, maybe a little, but because it helps him keep pace. You rub his ears during breaks. He licks your hand occasionally when he's too tired to resent you. There's some scholarly debate about whether the Turnspit dog was a distinct breed or just a variation of other small working dogs. But what's clear is that the job existed, and it was brutal. These dogs lived short, hard lives, often in cramped kitchens, rarely seeing the outside world except on Sundays, when some families would take them to church, either for exercise or sheer amusement. There are even accounts of Turnspit dogs being used as foot warmers in carriages or church pews, because nothing says aristocratic comfort like sticking your feet on a creature that spent all week running in a wheel over hot coals. Eventually technology catches up. Mechanical spit turners, called clock jacks, replace the dogs. Gears, weights and winding mechanisms do the job more efficiently, and suddenly the Turnspit dog is obsolete. The breed fades into obscurity, and with it the job that supported it. You leave the kitchen one morning after years of service, your apron stiff with grease, your hands blistered from lifting roasting pans, and the dog, old now, limping beside you. He no longer fits in the wheel. No one wants him, so you keep him. He sleeps by the hearth in your rented room, twitching in dreams that, no doubt, involve endless wheels and sizzling meat. When people ask what you do now, you say, "I used to manage the roast." You don't mention the dog. But sometimes when you pass a spit turning gently over an open fire and hear the slow creak of the gears, your feet move in rhythm, and in the back of your mind you can still hear the soft padding of paws, the sigh of an overworked animal who, for a while, was as essential to dinner as the fire itself. You'd think after spending years overseeing the slow, squeaky revolution of meat on a spit, your ears would have earned some peace. But no. Now the clanging isn't coming from cookware or creaking wheels. It's coming from actual iron being bolted to people's faces. Because, lucky you, your next job involves crafting one of the nastiest little items in Britain's long history of polite punishments. Congratulations. You're a scold's bridle maker. Sounds like a weird horse thing, right? Nope. It's a mask, for women. And no, not the sexy masquerade ball kind. This is iron, cold and biting, made to clamp down on mouths and egos. Your clients are magistrates and town officials. Your subjects? Women accused of being too mouthy, too sharp-tongued, or just generally inconvenient. Your forge sits at the edge of town, away from the polite company of the main market. People know what you do. They pretend not to. They glance away as they pass your workshop, pretending that the weird metal face cages on your shelf are for helmets, or odd garden decorations. But you know what they are. You make them to fit the human skull, custom curved, with slots for the nose, and one brutal little feature that makes your stomach twist. A flat piece of iron or spiked metal that goes inside the mouth, usually pressing down on the tongue. Sometimes it's smooth, sometimes it's serrated, always humiliating. Here's your historical fact. The scold's bridle, also known as a branx, was a real device used in Britain, especially in Scotland and northern England, from the 16th through 18th centuries. It was primarily used on women accused of being scolds, gossips, nags, or, in many cases, simply too outspoken. The goal wasn't just punishment. It was public humiliation. You design the mask to be heavy, with a locking clasp at the back. Some even have bells attached so the woman's every step is accompanied by jingling, drawing attention to her shame. Others are inscribed with phrases like "I am a scold" or "tongue of wickedness." It's equal parts torture device and moral warning sign. And yes, you feel conflicted. At first you think of it as metalwork, just another commission, like making hinges or shoe buckles. But the first time you see one being used, see a woman with tears cutting through soot on her face, the iron biting into her cheeks, you realise this isn't a neutral object, it's a message. one hammered and riveted into silence. Still, the orders keep coming. You're a smith. You don't set policy. You make what people pay for. That's the line you repeat to yourself, again and again, until you almost believe it. Here's your fringe fact. Some bridles had faceplates, little ornamental pieces over the forehead or cheeks with grotesque engravings or animal faces, meant to mock the wearer. A woman might be made to look like a donkey or a pig or a demon. Because it wasn't enough to hurt, she had to be transformed into a symbol of disorder. People gather in town squares to watch the punishments. A scold is locked into the bridle and paraded through the streets, led by a rope like an animal. Children point, men jeer, even other women turn away, either out of shame or fear that they'll be next. You watch from the edge of the crowd, not cheering, not clapping, just watching. The mask you made gleams in the afternoon light. You feel sick. Scholars today debate the actual frequency of bridal use. Were they as common as the records suggest or more symbolic, a threat rather than a widespread practice? Regardless, the threat was enough. The knowledge that you could be muzzled, dehumanized, displayed like a broken marionette, that shaped behavior, that kept mouths shut. You start, modifying your designs, making them less sharp, slightly looser, not enough to be obvious, but enough that maybe, just maybe, it hurts a little less. You get away with it by claiming the metal warped in the forge, too much heat, bad batch. You become the unreliable bridle maker. Fewer orders come your way. You're not heartbroken. Eventually the practice falls out of favour. Enlightenment thinking creeps in. Legal reforms arrive. Public punishments grow rarer. Scolds' bridles end up in curiosity cabinets, then museums, where people stare at them with fascinated horror. You don't miss the commissions. You melt down the last one yourself, quietly, in the dead of night. But it stays with you. The weight of what you made, the sounds, the jingle of the bells, the hiss of iron cooling, the muffled sobs beneath a locked jaw. You remember every single one, even the ones who never wore them, just lived in fear of them. You try other work, hinges again, locks. You tell yourself you're making things that open now, not things that shut. Still, when someone gets too loud in the tavern and a man mutters, "She's asking for a bridle," you clench your fists under the table, and you remember the heat of the forge and the weight of silence. You've put away the hammers, the rivets, and the shameful weight of your last job. No more cold iron masks. No more staring into eyes that begged you not to finish your work. This time, you promise yourself, you'll do something lighter, something simple, even poetic. But within a week, you're back in the dark again. This time, it's the literal dark. You're a link boy now. If that sounds like a minor supporting character in a Dickens novel, well, it kind of is. But in reality, link boys were essential to navigating the dark, stinking, twisted streets of pre-electric London. Your job is simple in theory. When night falls and someone needs to get from one end of the city to the other, you light the way. Your tools? A rag-topped torch soaked in pitch or oil, called a link, and a voice that cuts through the night. "Link, your honour? Light for a halfpenny?" You start your nights around twilight, stationed near taverns, theatres, or the front doors of wealthy households. You scan for people dressed too finely to walk alone, the ones squinting into the dusk, reluctant to step into the maze of alleyways, unsure of their footing. That's when you approach, holding your flame high, and offer to lead them, one flickering circle of light at a time, through the filthy, shadow-choked city. Here's your historical fact. Link boys were a common feature in British cities from the Elizabethan era through the early 19th century. Before gaslights were introduced in 1807, most streets had no fixed lighting, and navigating them after dark was dangerous, not just because of poor visibility, but because of what might be waiting in the gloom. Footpads, pickpockets, rats, open sewers, angry pigs, you name it. You are essentially a walking street lamp with a smart mouth. The torch is hot, smelly and dangerous. The rag atop it burns inconsistently, sometimes flaring up, sometimes guttering out. You carry spare links in your satchel, dipping them in oil as you go. You learn to tilt the torch away from your client's face, not out of courtesy, but because the cheap pitch smoke stings eyes and singes hair. Nobody wants to arrive at the opera with one eyebrow. Most nights your clients are drunk, slurring their addresses, laughing too loudly, stumbling down steps. You adjust your pace to theirs, guiding them around puddles, warning them about loose cobbles and, when necessary, pulling them sharply out of the way of fast-moving carriages or the occasional fleeing thief. You also carry a long stick or club, because not everyone out at night is friendly, and more than once you've had to scare off someone who thought your client looked like an easy target. In the hierarchy of the street, you're just a boy with a torch, but that torch is power. No one wants to fight in the light. You're quirky fringe fact. Some link boys had a sideline in extortion. They'd guide someone halfway through the city and then suddenly threaten to extinguish the torch unless paid double. Others worked in teams with thieves, guiding rich patrons down certain alleys, then vanishing just as a gang of cutpurses stepped out from the shadows. The line between protector and predator was thin, and you had to decide which side you were on. Or if you were on both, you play it mostly straight. You like the small rewards. A coin flicked your way, a nod of approval, the occasional pat on the head if the gentleman is particularly jolly or particularly drunk. On rare nights, someone important tips well. A shilling for your trouble, a crust of meat pie, even a scarf tossed your way for keeping them dry. But most nights it's cold, wet, and endless. The fog clings to your clothes, the torch oil burns your nostrils, and your shoes wear down to leather flaps soaked in slush. You see things, hear things, cries in the distance, rats dragging something heavy, a man sprinting past with bloody hands, a woman slumped against a wall, unmoving. You learn not to stop. You keep your flame lit, your head down, and your route straight. Scholars debate the social standing of link boys. Were they helpful guides, or were they part of the problem, a street gang in waiting, weaponizing light and shadow? The answer, as always, lies in the grey area. You were poor, you were young, and you were selling the one thing you had in the darkness: light. Eventually the job fades. Gas lights roll in, slowly, street by street. At first you grumble. No one wants to pay for a boy with a torch when there's a steady lamp burning over the road. You move further from the centre into the unlit districts, but then even those start to change. One night you walk a client to his door. He gives you a copper and says, "Soon we won't need you at all, eh?" You nod, say nothing, and watch the new gas lamp hiss and flicker behind you. It's steady, bright, unbothered by rain or wind. You walk away, the last of your links burning low, the shadows already retreating from something more modern, more permanent. And yet, for years, you were the light. One moving flame against the dark. You've spent years lighting the path for others, your torch pushing back the darkness just enough for someone richer, warmer and better fed to get home without stepping in something terrible. But now, with the gas lamps creeping in and your services no longer in demand, you find yourself standing in the daylight, staring at the mess left behind by dogs. Not metaphorically, you're literally staring at dog poop. Welcome to your new job, Pure Finder. No, not pure as in spiritual enlightenment or crystal healing. Pure is a polite Victorian euphemism for dog dung, specifically white dog dung, the kind that came from city mutts fed on bones, scraps and refuse. And for reasons we'll get to, brace yourself, it was highly prized by one particular industry: leather tanning. That's right. You're now responsible for collecting dog droppings in buckets, hauling them to tanneries, and selling them by weight to be used in the softening and finishing of leather. You're not just a poop collector, you're an essential part of the British fashion supply chain. Let's set the scene. It's the 1800s, and the streets of London are crawling with stray dogs. These aren't poodles on leashes, they're half-starved mongrels scavenging for anything vaguely edible. They leave their business wherever they please, and because no one's invented street cleaning departments or public sanitation, the Pure just sits there, waiting. That's where you come in. At dawn you set out with your bucket and a stick with a scraping blade. You know the best spots, behind butchers, around bakeries, near workhouses. You develop an eye for quality, not too fresh, not too dry, just the right texture and, God help us, colour. Pale and crumbly is ideal, like mouldy chalk. It means the dog had enough bone in its diet and that's what the tanners want. Here's your historical fact. Pure Finders were absolutely real, and their work was considered vital to the leather tanning industry, particularly during the 18th and 19th centuries. The collected dog feces were used during the baiting stage of tanning. mixed with water to form a foul-smelling slurry that helped clean and soften animal hides after they'd been soaked in lime. The enzymes in the excrement broke down proteins and made the leather more flexible. And yes, the smell was unholy. You wear a rag over your mouth, doesn't help much. People avoid you when they see you coming. You're worse than a gong farmer or a night soil man because at least they're dealing with human waste, which has a sort of dignity. You're chasing dogs down alleys with a bucket. Children heckle you. Shopkeepers glare when you poke around their back lanes. The only ones who smile at you are the tanners, and that's not really a smile so much as a wince of shared suffering. They know what you go through. You know what they go through. You're bound by stink. Your fringe fact for tonight. Some pure finders took it a step further and actually bred dogs for better quality dung. That's right. They curated poop like wine connoisseurs, paying attention to diet, regularity and the digestive health of their prized mutts. There were even rumours of people feeding dogs chalk or bones on purpose to ensure better output. You don't judge, you just collect. You keep a careful ledger of which streets produce the most. Certain alleyways are gold mines. Others dry up suddenly when a local dog catcher does his job too well. You time your rounds to avoid high-foot traffic. No one wants to see a man carefully ladling dog droppings into a bucket during their morning stroll. You're paid by the stone. Not much, but enough. A full bucket might buy you a crust of bread and a pint. 2 buckets, and you're feeling rich. You wear old boots, easier to burn when they inevitably become unsalvageable. Your hands are permanently scented with soap, though it never quite cuts through the smell. There's scholarly debate over just how widespread this job was, and whether it was often a side gig for people already doing other dirty trades. But diaries and city records confirm it. The pure finders were out there, braving the streets, collecting what no one else wanted, and making just enough to survive. One day you meet a boy doing the same work, about 12, nose running, grinning like an idiot as he proudly shows you his haul. You nod, hand him an old scrap of cloth for his hands, and feel something like camaraderie. You're part of a grim little brotherhood, the refuse brigade, the people who make clean leather boots possible by walking through the filth barefoot. And yet, it's honest work. You never lie about what you do, you just mutter it quickly and avoid eye contact. When someone thanks you for their new gloves, you simply smile and say, "Glad to be of service," and do not explain how many dog piles it took to get them supple. Eventually technology and chemistry evolve. Tanneries discover other enzymes. The demand for pure fades. People clean the streets. Sanitation improves. And your bucket sits, unused, in the corner of your tiny room. You don't miss the smell, or the looks, or the blisters. But sometimes, just sometimes, when someone complains about how leather just doesn't feel the same anymore, you grin. Because you know why. You made it soft. You made it smooth. You made it perfect. With a bucket and a purpose. After years wading through alleys with a bucket full of canine legacy, and a reputation that kept even the rats at arm's length, you're ready. Desperate. Really. For a role with a bit more social dignity. Maybe something with less scraping. Ideally something that doesn't make your eyes water from 30 paces. And wouldn't you know it, you finally land a job with a hat. Not a bucket. A proper hat. One with a feather no less. Because now you are a beadle, an officer of the parish, the watchful eye of the poorhouse, and arguably the least loved man in any given room. Now if you're thinking, beadle? That sounds vaguely Dickensian, you're spot on. You're basically what happens when a town crier, a mall cop, and a church usher walk into a tavern and decide to form a bureaucratic Avengers. Your job is to enforce order in the parish, keeping the poor in line, announcing official events, breaking up street gatherings, and reporting sins both real and imagined to the vestry. You're the guy everyone knows, but no one wants to see coming. You start each morning at the parish office, where your responsibilities are written on parchment with more loops and flourishes than actual clarity. But you get the gist. Keep the peace, manage the paupers, ring the bells, report delinquents, escort beggars to the workhouse, and generally be the grim face of civic order. You also get a long staff, decorative of course, but useful for tapping doors, pointing at loiterers, and occasionally rapping the knuckles of unruly orphans. Here's your historical fact. Beadles were a real and long-standing British profession, dating back to medieval times, but reaching their bureaucratic peak during the 18th and 19th centuries. Their role evolved from ecclesiastical officers, essentially church assistants, to full-blown parish enforcers, especially under the British poor law system. They were tasked with overseeing poor relief, monitoring who received alms, and making sure no one cheated the system. Which means you spend a lot of time peering into people's windows. You're the one who checks that the widow with 7 children actually needs bread and isn't hiding a secret loaf under the bed. You're the one who makes sure the drunk who just staggered into the poorhouse isn't sneaking out at night to drink away the parish's generosity. You ask uncomfortable questions. You memorise faces. You enforce moral order. It doesn't make you popular, but it does give you access to a strange little world of whispers and secrets. You see everything. The woman who weeps after her 3rd miscarriage. The boy who keeps stealing turnips because his father's vanished. The old man who pretends to be deaf so no one makes him lead prayer. You write it all down. Neatly. In ink. The vestry expects a report every week. Here's your fringe fact. Some beadles took their authority a little too seriously. There are records of beadles refusing paupers access to soup kitchens because they didn't wear proper shoes, or separating families for being inappropriate under the eyes of the parish. One even escorted a goat into the town square and put it on trial for eating the vicar's roses. The goat was acquitted, but the beadle was not. You walk a fine line between duty and nuisance. One day, you escort a young pregnant woman to the workhouse and hand her over to the matron. You write down her name, her age, the name of the man who abandoned her, though she never says it out loud. You feel the silence settle around her like fog. She never looks at you again. You ring the bell for Sunday services. You supervise the collection box. You catch a boy trying to slip an extra coin into his own pocket and deliver a stern lecture about temptation. Later, you give him a roll from your lunch because you remember what it was like to be hungry too. There's ongoing scholarly debate about whether beadles were protectors or persecutors, helpers or hall monitors with too much self-importance. In reality, they were both. You enforce the rules of a system designed to manage poverty, not end it. And that awareness creeps in slowly, like rot in old wood. You start going through the motions with less fire. You still wear the hat, still carry the staff. But your reports become a bit vaguer, less damning. You fail to catch certain transgressions. You leave doors unlocked. You begin to see the people, not just their cases. Still, you do your job. Because someone has to. And because, deep down, you believe that even within the cracked machinery of parish bureaucracy, someone should show a sliver of mercy. Eventually you grow older. Your hat doesn't sit quite right anymore. Your knees ache when you make the rounds. New laws come in. The workhouses change. Some disappear altogether. Your role shrinks. No one asks you to ring bells anymore. They've got a boy for that now. You sit at your desk one last time, signing off on your final ledger. You look at the names, the notes, the small scrawled dramas of lives that never made it into books, and you feel something unexpected. Not pride, exactly, but weight. You carried their names, their troubles, their truths. You hang up your hat, set your staff in the corner, and walk out. Not as a symbol of authority, but just another old man with a worn coat, and a head full of stories no one ever asked to hear. You've spent your life chasing pigs, dodging cannonballs, scooping up filth, and enforcing rules that only ever seem to serve people with better shoes than you. You've worn too many hats, some literal, some metaphorical, and all of them left your scalp sweaty, and your conscience heavier than expected. And now, as the final roll of this parade of peculiar British professions marches up to meet you, it feels oddly quiet. Not grimy, not chaotic, just solemn. Tonight, your job is to walk the streets with a handbell and a voice, because now you are the crier of the dead. Yes, this was an actual thing. You begin your work just after dusk. The town is settling into stillness, shopkeepers closing shutters, horses clomping their last route of the evening, candles flickering behind lace curtains. You walk slowly, deliberately, holding a small bell in one hand and a folded paper in the other. You ring the bell twice, clear, cold notes slicing through the air like punctuation, and then you speak. You speak of death. You announce that Margaret Turner of West Row passed quietly in her sleep, aged 67. You say she was the beloved mother of 5, that she will be buried at St. Mary's on Thursday. You request prayers. You say her name aloud so the town won't forget, and then you walk on. Here's your historical fact. The crier of the dead, or sometimes death bellman, was a real role in British towns, especially in the 17th through early 19th centuries. In an era before telephones, newspapers, or townwide literacy, the most efficient way to let a community know someone had passed was for a designated person to walk the streets and speak the news aloud. It was considered a sign of respect to have one's death publicly announced, ensuring not only proper mourning, but also attendance at the funeral and observance of the last rites. The job requires a voice that can carry, not booming, but clear and gentle. Not every death is peaceful, not every announcement well received. Some names you barely get through before someone nearby sobs. Others, people greet with a nod and a whispered, "About time." You never comment. You just ring the bell and read the name. There's a strange intimacy to the job. You become familiar with every family, every lineage, every fragile life slowly aging toward your list. You know who's been ill, who's overdue, who'll be next even if no one says it aloud. You wear dark clothes, usually black or grey, and a cloak when it rains. A brimmed hat. Gloves, if you can afford them. The bell is polished every week. Its tone important, sharp enough to cut through street noise, soft enough not to feel like a fire alarm. You ring it once or twice before each name, always the same number for consistency. Death demands rhythm, your fringe fact. Some death criers were also responsible for delivering the actual bodies to the churchyard, or at least leading the way. In certain parishes they doubled as coffin bearers, or even dug the graves if no one else was available. The role could straddle that line between herald and undertaker, messenger and mourner. You weren't just a voice, you were a presence, a ritual in motion. There's debate among historians about whether this role was reserved for the elderly, or offered as part of poor relief, work given to those who couldn't labour physically but were still considered capable. Some think criers were chosen for their voice. Others believe it was about trust. You had to handle death with dignity, without gossip, without judgment. You take it seriously. Even when no one listens, even when the streets are empty, and the only sound is your own boots on the stones and the sad little chime of your bell, you still speak the names. Some you knew, some you didn't. But in your voice, they are all equal. You don't embellish. You don't rush. You read each name like a prayer, because in a town where half the people die without a headstone, your voice might be the only record they ever had. Sometimes a child runs up to you and asks who died. You tell them gently, with just enough detail. Other times, someone pays you extra to include a line about the deceased's favourite hymn, or how they always smelled of violets. You accept the coin and write the words into your script with care. Not every day brings a name. Some days you walk the route anyway. People expect to see you, even when there's no death to announce. They nod. You nod back. A silent understanding that life goes on, that someone somewhere is still keeping track. Eventually the newspapers replace you, then the telegraph, then obituaries and online notices in a world so noisy that no one hears a bell anymore unless it's coming from a phone. You retire quietly. No one announces your name in the street. You walk the route one last time just out of habit, your hand brushing the cool handle of your old bell tucked into your coat. You don't ring it. But in your mind you remember every name, and for a moment, in the hush of the town you once served, you swear you can still hear your own voice calling out into the dusk. So now you're here, at the end of the long, winding road of Britain's weirdest jobs, with your feet sore from centuries of walking, your hands still faintly stained from ink, soot, and God knows what else, and your memory echoing with the sounds of bells, wheels, whispers, and dogs that definitely didn't want to be there. You've gone from soot to soup, from cannon smoke to copper pipes, from whispers in cottages to roars from broadsides, and through it all, you've held onto your torch, sometimes literally. You've lived as a leech bringer and a roast turner, a night walker and a daylight shamer. You whispered healing charms with herbs tucked under your tongue, and rang out the names of the newly dead with a voice strong enough to split fog. You have been needed, feared, ignored, tipped, cursed, and occasionally thanked. Most of the time, no one knew your name. You were the backdrop, the small gear in the massive clanking machine of society. But without you, the roast burned, the leather cracked, the cannon stayed silent, and the dead went unremembered. Sure, the jobs were odd. They sound like pranks now, but each one, Every last strange, uncomfortable, back-breaking role existed because the world needed something done, and someone had to do it. And usually, that someone was broke, overlooked, and wearing shoes held together by sheer will. History doesn't always remember these people. Their names are mostly gone. Their lives weren't written down in gilded letters or bronze plaques. But look closely and you'll see them, the shadows walking ahead, the hands holding the torch, the voices in the dark corners of the archives still whispering, "I was here." So as the last coals of tonight's story burn down and the air cools around you, rest knowing that somewhere in the folds of history your job mattered, even if it smelled like dog poop or involved goats or required you to shout death into the evening air. Now turn off the light. Let the soft hum of the past lull you. Dream of cobbled streets, iron hats, and strange titles. And if you ever find yourself stuck in traffic or buried in emails, just be grateful no one's asking you to climb into a sewer with a bag and a hook at 3 a.m.